Burning neighborhoods, strings of horrific axe murders, a burger joint selling human flesh, and only one question. You mad, bro? Fans of internet memes from the mid-2000s might remember one inescapable image commonly known as Trollface. Trollface and his trademark grin symbolized mischief and troublemaking, and generally making the world a more chaotic place. Over time, as is often the case on the internet, new variations on the image began to spring up as users created their own spin on Trollface. At first, it was all relatively harmless, but then again, this is the internet. Nothing online stays harmless forever. Over time, more sinister variations on Trollface began to surface, memes consisting of joke instructions that took a dark, destructive turn. This new spin on the Trollface quickly became known as Trollge, and often featured disturbing content presented in a joking, prankster format. Still, not something to be too concerned about. Just standard edgy posting, trying to get a reaction by shocking people. Right? Not exactly. On December 24, 2020, in Melbourne, Australia, a college student named Lee Miller received an early Christmas present from her classmate and ex-boyfriend, Peter Whitkins. The two had parted on relatively good terms, and she was glad to receive a gift from him. When she opened it, she was delighted to see that he had purchased her a jar of expensive French facial moisturizer, one she had been interested in trying back when they were together. As she prepared to do her skincare routine that night, she thought about how thoughtful the gift was and how sweet Peter was. Maybe she'd made a mistake breaking things off. Maybe after the holidays, she could reach out and see if they could give things another shot. As she unscrewed the jar of moisturizer, she didn't notice that its color and smell seemed just a bit off. She just dipped her fingers inside and began to apply the cream to her face. All of a sudden, she realized what a horrible mistake that was. Her face began to burn, her skin screaming out in a pain like none she'd ever felt before. She screamed, clawing at her face, desperate for a way to make it stop. Neighbors heard the screams and called emergency services. When paramedics arrived on the scene, her condition had gotten even worse. They restrained her, sedated her, and took her to the hospital for treatment. The face cream was brought in for testing and was found to have been tampered with. It had been spiked with gimpy, one of the world's most excruciatingly painful plants. Peter was promptly brought in for questioning, but refused to explain why he had done it. He was charged with assault, and officers inspected his home for anything that might suggest a motive. On his computer, they found the most recent post he had read before, presumably committing the crime. It was a Trollge meme, formatted as a comic, and it read, "Want to get back at your girlfriend? Step 1. Find out her favorite facial cream. Step 2. Procure the facial cream. Step 3. Obtain utrican plant. Use gloves. Step 4. Blend the leaves with the cream, then repack it. Step 5. Give girlfriend the gift." The meme contained a 6th step, but it was redacted in all official records for reasons that will soon become clear. This incident caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who swiftly looked into the meme as a potential anomaly. As they were conducting their investigation, it happened again. Another Trollge meme, another horrible crime with an inexplicable motive. On December 28, 2020, in Banda Aceh, Indonesia, 15 terminally ill patients were found dead in their hospital beds. That wouldn't necessarily be cause for alarm, given the nature of their conditions, except for the cause of death. The patients did not pass away due to their illnesses. Instead, each and every one of them was killed by carbon monoxide poisoning. At first, the case was a mystery, until security footage revealed that one of the hospital's orderlies, Aziz Hidyat, replaced the patient's oxygen tanks with tanks of carbon monoxide. He was promptly arrested and brought in for questioning. During the interrogation, he repeated again and again that he was not trying to harm the patients, but he was delivering them. The police officers asked who he was trying to deliver them to, but he refused to answer. A search through his computer browser history uncovered another Trollge meme. This one read, "Want to help people? Step 1. Get a job at a hospital. Step 2. Make friends with the patients. Step 3. Enter oxygen tank room. Step 4. Replace tanks with carbon monoxide. Step 5. Release them from their defective vessels." The SCP Foundation had been in the process of formulating a hypothesis, but now it was confirmed. These variations on the Trollge meme contained a cognito-hazardous switch that would cause a reader to carry out the acts described in the comic. The switch appeared to specifically be contained in the conclusive line, hence its removal from all official records of any identified anomalous memes. An estimated 0.25% of those exposed to an anomalous meme would be affected by this cognito hazard. The phenomenon was given the designation SCP-6661, and the memes themselves SCP-6661-1. These first two incidents were nicknamed the Pretty Girl Incident and the Sleepy Time Incident, respectively. Several other notable incidents occurred following the discovery of SCP-6661. On January 20th, 2021, the Harvester Valley Incident occurred. Oliver Desjardins of Alberta, Canada packed his bags full of camping supplies, fresh drinking water, a flashlight, and an axe. He kissed his wife and children goodbye, and he drove out to the local tourist campground. After darkness fell, he left his tent, axe in hand, and walked from camp to camp, slaughtering anyone he came across. He managed to kill 10 people and injure 14 before he was killed by the authorities. Everyone who knew Oliver was shocked, saying he had no history of violent behavior. He wouldn't even kill a spider when he found one inside. His wife gave the authorities permission to examine his internet activity, and sure enough, they found a Trollge meme left open. Want to have a good holiday? Step 1. Pack necessary equipment and items. Step 2. Say goodbye to family. Step 3. Drive to the valley campgrounds. Step 4. Find local shepherd and his flock. Step 5. Steal a little lamb. Step 6. Relish upon its flesh, for it will be your dying meal. Step 7. Data expunged. After reading the meme, the Foundation determined that a nearby farmer was indeed missing one of his sheep. The bones of the missing sheep were later discovered near the campground where the attack took place. This new finding suggested that the cognito-hazardous effects tended to result in a largely literal interpretation of the given meme's text. Oliver himself could not be questioned about his actions due to his death on the scene, so there were no more answers to be uncovered in his case. On February 16, 2021, in Bratislava, Slovakia, a man named Josef Prochaska began displaying unusual behavior at around 0200 hours. He drove through his neighborhood in his water truck and began using it to spray kerosene upon nearby buildings throughout the area. The sound and the smell woke several neighbors who attempted to reason with Joseph and make him stop what he was doing. He ignored them as if in a trance and carried on with his task. Frightened for their safety as well as that of their clearly unwell neighbor, they called emergency services to the scene. Emergency services arrived to find Joseph standing in front of the active nozzle, kerosene blasting directly onto him. He didn't even seem to notice. As the authorities approached him, calling out to him, asking him to come with them, he acknowledged their presence. He smiled broadly and pulled something from his pocket. All too late, they realized what it was: a road flare. He ignited it, and the area was swiftly engulfed in flames. 26 people were killed in the blast, and hundreds of thousands in property damage occurred as a result. That was shocking enough, but additional emergency responders who arrived at the scene saw something even more bizarre. It began to rain, putting out some of the flames. As the water touched the kerosene-soaked bodies and landscape, paramedics were completely taken aback as they saw corpses and bits of rubble begin to float up into the air, up into the sky. One man later described what he had seen to the police, saying, "It was as if they were floating on the water that was falling from the sky." The authorities dismissed this account, but the SCP Foundation knew better. This had to be another Trollge incident. Indeed, it was. And on Joseph's computer, they found the guilty meme. Oil is lighter than water. Step 1, cover yourself in oil. Step 2, feels good. Step 3, cover others in oil. Step 4, data expunged. Somehow this particular instance of SCP-6661 had managed to alter the laws of physics, to bend them to its will. It was a troubling development, and not something they cared to see repeated. Containment procedures were swiftly put into place. Web crawlers monitored the internet for any appearances of Trollge, particularly those that seemed to have cognito-hazardous properties. If they could track these instances and delete them from circulation, perhaps they could prevent any more needless destruction. During the monitoring process, some of the web crawlers detected an instance of SCP-6661-1 with a heavily distorted concluding step. Before expunging this step, junior researcher Mikel Ramirez edited out the distortion and scanned the image through a spectrogram generator. This was, it should be noted, without prior authorization. The spectrogram generated audio, 3 recognizable words. Junior researcher Ramirez was reprimanded for breaching protocol, but his work proved to be valuable enough to warrant additional research. With the sign-off of the O5 Council, a spectrogram was constructed with a reply to this question and spread through the internet. The Foundation's response was, "Yes, we see you. Who are you? And why are you doing this?" Within 24 hours of the Foundation's response, another SCP-6661-1 instance with a similar distortion was found. The distortion was isolated and scanned through a spectrogram generator once more. It stated, This revelation gave the Foundation a new theory on the nature of SCP-6661. The initial Trollface meme was so popular, so widespread and beloved, that the collective energy directed towards it created a thought form able to manifest via the meme. When Trollface declined in popularity over the years, the thought form became desperate to achieve the same relevance again. It gravitated towards darker subject matter, toward the shocking and disturbing in order to get attention. This resulted in the creation of SCP-6661-1, an opportunity for the thought form to feel seen again. When it does not feel seen, when it is not fed energy and attention, the thought form becomes weak and desperate. The cognitohazardous effects may not be deliberate at all, but rather an unfortunate side effect of this particular manifestation. An additional theory was proposed: the way to limit the effects of SCP-6661-1, to perhaps even eradicate it, is to make the original Trollface popular again. The troll must be fed. At first, the Foundation was reluctant to put this theory into practice. It seemed patently absurd to many of the higher-ups, but the percentage of susceptible individuals began to increase, and more incidents occurred. In July of 2021, residents of a small Virginia town began to go missing, one by one, until over a dozen people had mysteriously disappeared. There appeared to be no common link between the missing persons until one unlikely thread surfaced, tying them all together. Shortly before their disappearance, each person had eaten a meal at Billy's Burgers, the local burger joint. Police interrogated all employees, but no new information turned up. They checked security camera footage, but only one of the cameras at the small local business was operational, and it only captured the restaurant's main entrance. It was beginning to look like one more dead lead. That is, until one of the investigating officers heard his stomach rumble and decided to grab a burger and fries for the road. Back at the police station, the officer sat down to enjoy his lunch, taking a big, juicy bite out of his burger. Suddenly, he felt something hard crack against his tooth. He reached into his mouth and fished it out. At first, he didn't believe his eyes, but sure enough, there was a human finger bone. He hopped back in his police car, drove back to Billy's Burgers, and demanded to investigate the kitchen. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary right away, but he trusted his gut and the bite of the burger that he had almost put it in. He confiscated the freshly ground meat and had it analyzed. The results came back, and his stomach dropped. It was human. Once more, the police officer drove back to the burger joint. This time, his lights were flashing, his siren was blaring, and he was ready to make an arrest. When he arrived, the place was eerily quiet. All the lights were off. He drew his weapon and crept toward the back, where he found the fry cook, Jeffrey Toombs, operating the meat grinder. Next to the machine, he could make out bloody scraps of employee uniforms, and suddenly realized why the place was so quiet. Jeffrey was making his coworkers into burgers. He arrested Jeffrey and brought the young man into custody. All he would say over and over again was, I made them better. The SCP Foundation caught wind of this horrifying case and arrived to conduct their own investigation. They found another cognitohazardous meme. This one read, Everyone loves burgers. Step 1, get job at a burger place. Step 2, improve on the recipe. Step 3, source your own meat. Step 4, profit. Step 5, expunged. The Foundation attempted to interrogate Jeffrey as well, but he was still not forthcoming. He did say one thing, however. He requested that for his dying meal in prison, he be given a burger. After this incident, the order was given. The Trollface experiment would be carried out. A team of researchers, sociologists, and statisticians was assembled and asked to design images and media involving Trollface, now designated SCP-6661-2. The images were then disseminated across the Foundation intranet, attempting to saturate the media with this mimetic agent until it achieved a status colloquially known as dank. This team was designated Task Force Hexa 9 Meme Machine. The initial experiment was a success, and the incidents began to slightly reduce. The all-clear was given, and SCP-661-2 was disseminated across the internet. Again, incident numbers decreased. This allowed for standard containment procedures to be put in place, procedures still in use today. The Foundation has established a think tank to observe the trends and popularity of SCP-6661-2. If its popularity declines, the think tank will evaluate the best course of action to take. SCP-661-2 based mimetic agents are to be spread across various social media sites and the internet at large, as well as the Foundation intranet. Foundation web crawlers must consistently scan the internet at large for instances of SCP-6661-1 and look for active SCP-6661-1 events. If any instances are found, the concluding instructions must be redacted whenever possible. Any personnel that is going to deal directly with SCP-6661-1 must be mimetically inoculated before being assigned to the anomaly. Oh, wait, it seems as though there's one more mimetically infected comic. The first thing that tips the Foundation off to SCP-087's presence were the reports of numerous unexplained disappearances on campus. There were plenty of rumors about what might be behind them, but field agents suspected that the true source of the vanishing would be something beyond civilian imagination. All anyone knew for sure was that everyone who had gone missing was last seen in a certain administrative building on the university grounds, and that the disappearances only seemed to happen when the elevator was out. The campus was soon flooded with Foundation agents, creating a barrier around the administrative building and the presumed habitat of SCP-087. Nobody else could get in, and hopefully whatever was inside couldn't get out. One of the Foundation's lead scientists was flown in to consult on the investigation. What could have been behind those students disappearing? The doctor's preliminary interviews with university staff who worked in the building yielded some interesting details. Strange noises, like banging and even a faint, shrill crying, would be heard from a door that led to a no longer used stairway in hallway 3B. Staff in the building had no reason to ever take these stairs, especially considering how many of them reported a strange sense of unease when just standing outside the dorm. The only reason someone might take those stairs is due to elevator malfunctions. In that instant, the doctor had put it all together. The staff they interviewed had their memory wiped with amnestics, special chemicals used by the Foundation with the power to delete human memories. The Foundation only used them for staff or civilians who had confirmed contact with an SCP, and the doctor knew that they had a live one on their hands. The staircase. There was something terribly wrong with that staircase, and it was the SCP Foundation's job to find out what, before it made anybody else disappear. This is the story of SCP-087, otherwise known as the Endless Staircase, and the 3 doomed journeys down into its murky depths. The doctor was more than eager to begin research into the staircase and its frightening, anomalous properties. After all, you don't claw your way up to being one of the Foundation's key researchers without being brave, and perhaps just a little bit deranged. As was standard, once a perimeter was secured around the staircase, the good doctor requested a selection of D-Class personnel for testing. For those not in the know, D-Class is the Foundation's polite way of saying cannon fodder. The doctor was sent 3 D-Class prisoners for use in his investigation of SCP-087. The first, D-8432, was, according to official documentation on the incident, a 43-year-old male of average build and appearance and unremarkable psychological background. This man once worked for the Foundation in a more official capacity, but he was given the often deadly demotion to D-Class due to a dangerous mistake handling SCP-682 that led to the deaths of several other agents. Now, it looked like it would be his turn. The doctor explained his mission to him: explore the staircase, gather data, help us find out exactly what we're dealing with here. If you come back alive, there may even be a promotion in it for you. And with that promise, D8432 was given his loadout: a 75-watt flood lamp with battery power capable of lasting 24 hours, an audio headset, and a handheld camcorder fitted with a transmission stream, and an audio headset that would allow him to communicate with Dr. Bright. D8432 was then pushed through the door in hallway 3B and out onto the staircase. According to declassified Foundation files describing the staircase, SCP-087 is an unlit platform staircase. Stairs descend on a 38-degree angle for 13 steps before reaching a semicircular platform of approximately 3 meters in diameter. Descent direction rotates 180 degrees at each platform. The design of SCP-087 limits subjects to a visual range of approximately 1.5 flights. But in D8432's mind, unlit really didn't seem like the right word. He would have chosen all-consuming darkness. Despite carrying a powerful 75-watt lamp, D8432 was only capable of partially lighting the platform he was standing on, and the illumination only stretched down 9 of the 13 steps to the next platform. When D8432 observed how little help his lamp was giving him, he was instructed to shine it out of the doorway into hallway 3B. When he did so, the light seemed to shine far further than it ever could in SCP-087. Already, the beginning of the anomalous activity was obvious. Everywhere else, darkness is just the absence of light. In SCP-087, darkness eats light. It was like a tangible black mass that only a certain amount of light could survive, while the rest just wouldn't show. D8432 swallowed hard over a lump in his throat. The door to hallway 3B was closed behind him, and he was ordered to descend. Surviving to see that promotion was feeling unlikely, but it's not like he had a choice. If he tried to escape SCP-087 before he was permitted, he'd be shot by SCP Foundation field agents on the spot. So he followed the high-ranking doctor's orders and began to descend the steps to the next platform. Nothing about the physical makeup of the staircase itself seemed abnormal. The base and walls were a very plain, dull concrete with a metal handrail. The only thing that seemed unique about it so far was the strange light-bending properties. That was, until he reached the second platform down and he heard it, a soft, echoing cry. A child's cry. It was shrieks of panic, or maybe even pain, echoing up from below. He was asked why he had stopped, and he explained the crying sound he'd been hearing. It sounded like it was coming from far down the stairs, maybe 200 meters below him. He could just make out the words "please," "help," and "down here" coming from the darkness. But the team outside the stairwell couldn't hear anything, so they asked him to descend further. Another platform down, and they could hear it too, the unmistakable cries of a terrified child. "Please, help," and "down here." D8432 was ordered to keep going, and only stop if he noticed changes to the visual environment or in the sounds he was hearing. D8432, knowing his life was on the line, had to keep going, and descended another 20 flights of stairs before stopping to remark that the sounds of the child hadn't gotten any closer. They still sounded just as far away as when he'd first heard them. He was told his observations were noted and pressured to continue. Within half an hour, D8432 had descended a full 50 floors, with no sign of a bottom in sight. Somehow, the volume of the child's crying had remained consistent throughout, as if it was moving away from D8432 at the same rate he was descending. At this point, D8432 reported that he was feeling uneasy. The doctor said that this was understandable, given the circumstances. He'd been watching what little there was to see over a live video feed the entire time, and something about the truly bottomless nature of the staircase and the ever-elusive crying was undeniably eerie. But things were about to really take a turn for the worst. As D8432 stepped forward towards the next set of stairs, he froze. There was something on the platform below him, barely illuminated by the light of his 75-watt bulb. It was a face, vaguely human in size and shape, but with a few terrifying differences. It had grayish skin and no mouth, nostrils, or pupils. And yet, D8432 could feel that this thing was making eye contact with him. He couldn't move, trapped in the thing's piercing gaze. In an instant, the face jerked forwards, suddenly only about a foot away from D432's face, eyes staring into its own. D-8432 screamed and ran, scaling all 50 flights in an astonishing 18 minutes before charging out into hallway 3B. There, he collapsed from the exhaustion and the fear of what he'd just seen. Upon reviewing the footage, the strange face was designated SCP-087-1. Fascinating. It was time for a second experiment. The doctor just had to know more. The second test subject was D-9035, a 28-year-old male with a history of aggravated assaults against women. He was given the same loadout as his predecessors, except this time with an even more powerful 100-watt bulb. He was also given 100 small LED lights that had adhesive backs and a battery life of approximately 3 weeks, with which they intended to permanently illuminate SCP-087. However, despite the extra wattage of his bulb, he still couldn't illuminate beyond the 9th step. SCP-087 wouldn't allow it. Having no ideas of the horrors that lurked below him, he descended on the doctor's orders and began fixing the LEDs to the walls of each platform he passed. The LED always illuminated the landing, but the light couldn't pass the first step on either side. The flights of stairs themselves would remain in perpetual darkness. After the second flight, D-9035 noticed the same crying D-8432 had heard and became uneasy. Just like before, as D-9035 descended, the volume of the crying didn't seem to increase, as if for every step he descended, the source of the crying descended 1, 2, keeping them at a constant 200 meters apart. Still, he was ordered to continue his descent and the placing of LEDs even as his paranoia grew. When he reached the 51st floor, he observed damage to the wall and steps. Sections appeared to have been smashed to rubble by an extreme force. As he descended past the broken step, he only felt his fear, anxiety, and paranoia grow. The doctor made note of the fact that SCP-087 seemed to cause instances of anxiety and terror in its occupants, even before they encountered SCP-087-1. As D-9035 reached Platform 89, a full 350 meters under the initial platform, he stopped dead in his tracks and saw something staring up at him from the platform below. That same terrible gray face with those dead white eyes. He was encouraged to stay calm and try to get better footage of the face, but it charged for him, and D-9035 ran for his life. He ascended the staircase at a staggering pace, even passing out from exhaustion and remaining motionless for 14 minutes halfway. When D-9035 finally gathered the strength to get up, he scrambled back to hallway 3B and fell into a state of catatonia. He remains unresponsive to all external stimuli to this day, just staring off into the distance with a haunted expression, almost like he's still there in the hallway. The doctor wanted to conduct one more test before he ordered SCP-087 shut off from the world forever. And it was the most terrifying of all. The final subject was D-9884, a 23-year-old woman with a history of depression and use of excessive force. The doctor had hoped that D-9884 would travel the deepest yet, and so he gave her the additional supplies of a backpack containing 3.75 liters of water, 15 nutrient bars, and 1 thermal blanket. As far as the Foundation was concerned, she was in this for the long haul. But none of them had any idea quite how right they were. When D-9884 entered SCP-087, all the lights from the previous expedition had disappeared. Still, she was ordered to go deeper. She heard the crying of the mysterious child, if it was even a child at all, and again she was ordered to go deeper. At the 496th landing, even as D-9884 seemed to slip into a state of mortal terror, once again she was ordered to go even deeper. Every moment, he was hoping to get a better look at the face of SCP-087-1, and when D-9884 finally broke and fled back upstairs, he did. The face appeared, but this time, it was mere inches behind her, staring directly into the camera with its blank eyes, startling even this veteran of the supernatural. The face appearing caused D-9884 to panic and flee, but instead of going back up the stairs to safety, she went deeper down the staircase in an attempt to escape it, deeper and deeper and deeper, until her video feed cut out. D-9884 was never seen again. In the aftermath of the tests, the SCP was classified as Euclid. It may have been dangerous, but at least it was easy to contain.
The door to hallway 3B was replaced with one made out of reinforced steel with an electro-release lock mechanism. It has been disguised to resemble a janitorial closet consistent with the rest of the building. The lock won't release unless a classified number of electrical volts are applied, while the key is turned counterclockwise. And after a few inches of foam insulation were applied to the inner side of the door, staff at the building never again reported hearing strange noises. As for the fates of those lost within the endless turning flights and platforms of SCP-087, we may never know, but one can only assume it isn't pleasant.
Here we go again. It's time to return to the acid-filled containment chamber of SCP-682, more commonly known as the hard-to-destroy reptile. We've spoken about him and the ways the SCP Foundation has attempted to destroy him in a previous video. But as we said back then, we really only scratched the surface of the huge number of insane ways the Foundation has tried to wipe this cranky lizard off the face of the Earth. Today we're filling in some of the cracks and taking a look at the secret test logs detailing the Foundation's unsuccessful quest to finally destroy SCP-682. Some of these may surprise you, and if you're a real SCP expert, you may just recognize some familiar faces we meet along the way. Esteemed Foundation researcher Dr. Alto Clef, famed for his somewhat unconventional personality, entered the test chamber to see if he could intimidate the beast to death. This resulted in a long staring contest between Dr. Clef and 682. Towards the end of the competition, Dr. Clef began to lose his nerve. He tried to leave the room, only to find that the door was locked, causing him to swear loudly. Dr. Clef, who always tries to find the most direct solution to his problems, blew up the door with plastic explosives and ran off. The result? Test failed. Next came SCP-662, a silver handbell that summons the supernaturally helpful butler, Mr. Deeds. When Mr. Deeds was summoned, Foundation researchers asked him if he could kill SCP-682. Deeds politely explained that he wouldn't be capable of killing 682. It's just too strong. When he asked if he could at least incapacitate 682, he replied that the best way to do this would be to poison himself and allow 682 to eat his body. But this, he reminded, would only be a temporary problem for the lizard. Another test failed. The Foundation brought in SCP-689, a terrifying soapstone statue of a sitting skeleton that can kill you if you see it, and then stop paying attention to it. 682 first observed the statue, and then the Foundation turned off the lights. When they turned them back on, SCP-682 appeared to be dead in a puddle of gray and black liquid. D-Class personnel were sent in to confirm that 682 was actually dead, but it instead got up and killed them. Researchers theorize that 682's definition of life is not quite the same as ours, rendering 689's death-related powers ineffective. Test failed, yet again. SCP-807 was next up to bat. This is an anomalous salmon-colored ceramic dinner plate with the words "Last Chance Diner" printed on the edges in white. Any food placed on it becomes irresistible by any definition, but when the food is consumed, it causes immediate cardiac arrest due to the sudden clogging of arteries with fat. Researchers made a meal known as the 682 Special. 10 kilograms of rotten meat and sharpened bone splinters, 10 liters of rancid mayonnaise, 1 liter of potassium cyanide, and 1 kilogram of morphine hydrochloride, combined into a solid mass and transmuted by 807. When 682 consumed this disgusting meal, it appeared to collapse. However, when D-Class personnel were sent in again to see whether 682 was truly out for the count, multiple holes opened up in its body. These holes fired out high-pressure jets of blood, killing the nearby D-Classes and destroying the containment cell. 682 was fine afterwards. Another test failed. To kill 682, it seemed that the Foundation really needed to have God on their side, so they tried to recruit SCP-343, also known as God, to help them destroy the beast. However, when he entered the containment chamber, he somehow couldn't even see the beast. When researchers asked him whether he could kill 682, God replied, "He's not one of mine. Deal with him yourself." Test failed before it even began. Next, the Foundation recruited SCP-524, a small white rabbit that can eat literally anything, including itself, without being harmed. The rabbit was released into SCP-682's chamber, at which point it approached 682 and began to eat one of its legs. 682 roared in pain and scuttled up the wall, out of 524's reach, where it remained for a number of hours. At this point, SCP-524 seemed to become bored and began eating its way out of containment through a nearby wall. Test failed. Maybe the luck of the Irish was what the Foundation needed to finally put this monster to rest. They recruited SCP-1933, a fat man dressed as Santa Claus whose bodily fluids consist entirely of the alcoholic beverage known as Irish cream. If enough of this man's self-produced Irish cream is fed to something, they'll find that all of their bodily fluids have become Irish cream too, killing them. The Foundation fed large quantities of this Irish cream to SCP-682 and it actually had an effect, causing 682 to appear intoxicated, which was a promising sign. However, it soon vomited out a massive quantity of SCP-1933 bodily fluids, turning the walls of its cell into Irish cream and allowing it to escape and wreak havoc. Test failed. Big time. The Foundation recruited the help of SCP-2337, an intelligent corncrake known as Dr. Spanko, with a voice so loud it can quite literally talk its victims to death if it speaks to them for an extended period of time. It was sent into SCP-682's chamber to attempt to destroy the beast, but 682 just told it to leave, and the talkative bird obliged by blowing away one of the chamber walls with a yell, allowing SCP-682 to breach containment again. Terrible job, Dr. Spanko. Test failed. The Foundation researchers were starting to get a little frustrated with their lack of progress, which you can no doubt sympathize with, and they even pitched the possibility of sending SCP-682 into an alternate dimension, where perhaps it would enter into a stalemate against its alternate self. But this pitch was shot down by the O5 Council on the grounds that it was way too risky. Back to the drawing board, by which we mean they literally transformed 682's skin into a kind of drawing board. SCP-2521 is an anomaly that manifests anytime information about it is recorded, and immediately grabs the source of the information, wrapping it in its tendrils and taking it away with it. The Foundation sought to take advantage of this by using a laser cutter to cut this anomalous information into SCP-682's side. However, this didn't have the results they were hoping for. SCP-2521 did turn up to take the information, but it only took the skin on which the information was carved. 682 survived and quickly grew back its skin. Test failed again. Researchers suggested tracking down SCP-169, an obscenely massive underwater creature known as the Leviathan, and feeding 682 to the beast. However, this idea was also immediately shot down by the O5 Council. If 682 did what it did best, which was surviving attacks and adding them to its own arsenal, then it might grow to the size of SCP-169, which would likely trigger an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. It simply was not worth the risk. Test failed before it even started. The Foundation released 2 specimens of SCP-939 into 682's test chamber. These voice-imitating, amnesia-inducing monsters have caused huge damage to human targets, so it was hoped that they may be able to do something to 682. But this hope turned out to be misplaced. Both specimens seemed extremely distressed by 682's presence, and refused to engage at all. 682 did not share the same apprehension about attacking. It charged in and brutally killed both before devouring their corpses. Test failed. In a very well-documented case, the adorable SCP-999 was introduced into 682's test chamber. The unassailable good vibes provided by 999, as well as an intense tickle fight, did actually lead to the temporary incapacitation of SCP-682. However, the otherwise wholesome incident ended in tragedy, when 682 adapted to the good vibes and was able to release a kind of violent laughter wave. This incapacitated much of the staff and allowed 682 to breach containment and go on another killing spree, before being recontained. Test, once again, failed. The next test involved SCP-294, an anomalous coffee machine that can produce any liquid typed into its keypad. Foundation researchers requested SCP-682 Killer from the machine and were astounded by the results. During tests on the liquid with SCP-682 tissue samples, the liquid was surprisingly effective and caused the 682 tissue to decay and crumble. Tests on the living creature were similarly promising. The acid in 682's tank was temporarily lowered, and 1 liter of SCP-682 Killer was poured onto the reptile's head, causing that portion of its flesh to immediately decay. When the acid was returned, the same portion that had the liquid poured on it dissolved instantly. Test, well, not quite successful, but promising, and requiring further research. Foundation scientists believe that if they could one day get a large enough quantity of this liquid, they might have a viable option. But until then, the tests march on. For another experiment, they introduced SCP-055 into the containment chamber of SCP-682. SCP-055, also known as the Self-Keeping Secret, is a mysterious anomaly that can only be described by what it isn't. For example, we know that SCP-055 is not round, but that was pretty much it. Now, however, we know something else about SCP-055, that it can't kill SCP-682. Test failed, but at least we know twice as much about SCP-055 as we did before. Next came SCP-082, better known as Fernand the Cannibal. Fernand was first presented a piece of flesh from 682, but rather than eating it, he inspected it and began to express joy that his friends still live. When introduced into 682's testing chamber, Fernand attempted to subdue the lizard and use it as his steed. 682 expressed an intense hatred for both Fernand and the idea of being ridden like a pony, and the two of them engaged in combat. Mobile task forces were eventually brought in to subdue both subjects. In a debrief interview, both hinted that they shared history prior to containment, but 682 was reluctant to talk about it further. Test entertaining, but still a failure. Researchers were becoming extremely frustrated with SCP-682's unwillingness to die, so they called in an SCP who responded to reason much better. SCP-049, the Plague Doctor. This sinister surgeon can kill with a touch, and the Foundation hoped that his abilities would extend to 682. However, the result was a dud. The Plague Doctor did touch 682, but it experienced no adverse effects and eventually swiped at the Doctor. Upon leaving, 049 reported feeling emotionally disturbed by his encounter with SCP-682. Yep, you guessed it. Test failed. If it gives you any indication of just how desperate the researchers were at this point, Dr. Graham pondered whether introducing 682 to a human with just as pessimistic and misanthropic feelings as itself would somehow pacify it. They sent in a particularly nasty D-Class, and the two spoke. Fascinatingly, 682 didn't attempt to harm this D-Class. They just shared their profane and bleak sentiments about the human race with one another. However, some of 682's opinions were a little too spicy for this D-Class. After listening to the reptile speak for 20 minutes, the D-Class fell into a catatonic state from the sheer depression of it all. He died not long after. One researcher suggested perhaps the worst idea of all, letting SCP-682 out into the wild. Not even really to terminate it, just to see what it does. The scientists figured there would be some merit in analyzing the creature's behavior. This idea was submitted anonymously, of course. It seems even the most sadistic of researchers know better than to put their name on an idea like that. As you can probably guess, this request was shot down by the O5 Council. The note attached to the request by one of its members summed it up best. I'll tell you what it will do. It'll go out for a nice stroll, murder a few innocent people, go fishing, slaughter a few more innocent people, start up a tech company, eat a few more innocent people, go on a vacation to Florida, dismember a few more innocent people. I swear, when I find out who wrote this, you can personally enter 682's containment chamber to analyze him yourself. This has been far from an exhaustive account of all the different ways the SCP Foundation has tried to terminate SCP-682. But it shouldn't be surprising that all of their ideas have either been failures or were too risky to even try. Sadly for the SCP Foundation and the human race, it's likely we'll be dealing with SCP-682 for a long time to come. But do you have an idea for how you think 682 could finally be killed? Something that even the Foundation hasn't thought of to try? Let us know in the comments.
Over 50 men and women, clad in red robes, kneel before an unholy altar. They chant and mutter indecipherable words, words of cruelty and madness, of obsession and sacrilege. Not long ago, these were regular people. Computer technicians, teachers, plumbers, construction workers, accountants. This was before they fell under the ungodly influence of a new ruler. The center of this makeshift place of worship was once a normal school gymnasium, but it's now the home of a huge statue. A humanoid being, wreathed in tentacles. Its head is more like a squid or cuttlefish than anything resembling an actual human face. While he's known to the cultists as the Tentacled God, the beast they worship is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-6662, and he sits in the belly of one of their expansive containment facilities, locked away from the world. But not for long, if his devoted followers have anything to say about it. This is their God, all-powerful and unchanging, and when it comes to springing him from containment, no tactic is too vile or underhanded to get the job done. Their mortal leader and high priest, a man in a purple robe calling himself Brother Marsh, walks among their crouched forms. He whispers instructions for the great day of liberation that's soon to come, providing everyone plays their part. It's a plan months in the making, and one that, if it goes off without a hitch, could free their monstrous god into the world. They would strike at the very heart of their enemy, the SCP Foundation, when they least expect it, and nothing shall stand in their way. How could they lose when they have a god on their side? But why did all these normal people become violent zealots for a squid-faced deity? It all began with a dream. To those who experienced these dreams, they felt more like prophecies, premonitions of the glorious horrors to come. A red sky, billions dead, and billions more enslaved, a dark silhouette on the horizon. Their tentacled god holding dominion over all. At first, it just seemed like a strange nightmare. The ones who experienced it woke up shaken and afraid, hoping to shake the images from their mind, but they couldn't. Every night, the nightmare would return. They'd see the images, the red sky, the dead and enslaved, the tentacled god. And after a while, it would come to them even when they weren't asleep, eventually happening whenever they closed their eyes. Little by little, this scene stopped looking so hideous and started to look glorious. They felt his presence in their minds, slowly pushing them towards their inevitable future. They started to realize that they wanted him to rule over the universe and to experience the honor of serving him. Many of them abandoned their homes and families, leaving their friends and loved ones left to worry that they'd gone insane. In their eyes, they were safer than they'd ever been. They finally had purpose. They were working in service of something far greater than themselves. The influence of the tentacled god drew them closer to one another. They would meet in secret, exchanging information from the prophecies their ruler sent to them in their dreams. They worshiped together, building altars and idols to congregate around. They performed dark blood rituals involving human and animal sacrifice. It was when Brother Marsh, the Anointed One, arrived to guide them towards their true mission that things kicked into high gear. Just 3 months prior, Brother Marsh had been an office drone working in data entry for a large insurance company before the tentacled god invaded his thoughts with a simple message: "Free me, and the new world I create shall be your playground." Since then, he devoted himself completely to the cause, quitting his job and maxing out his credit cards to help fund his new life's purpose, infiltrating the SCP Foundation and releasing his inhuman ruler from its imprisonment. That was the single goal he united the cultists under: freedom for the tentacled god. And at long last, they had all the pieces in place to strike. They'd finally gathered the necessary intel to subvert the will of the most powerful secret organization on Earth. Even the strongest institution is made of people, and people are weak. Unlike the almighty tentacled god, people could be broken. The people in question were Kelly Thompson, Sidney Levitt, Jordan Broche, Dr. Juan Gutierrez, and Jillian Larson. Dr. Juan Gutierrez was a researcher with level 3 clearance on the site where the tentacled god was being contained. Sidney Levitt and Jordan Broche were both security officers charged with verifying personnel clearance on site. Kelly Thompson was a member of site administration with research authorization powers, and Jillian Larson was a research assistant who often collaborated with Dr. Gutierrez. These 5 were the key to getting access to SCP-6662 and bringing their plan to fruition. Normally, personnel dossiers on people working for the Foundation were highly confidential, but the devotees of the tentacled god had their ways. They had a number of computer experts in their ranks, more than capable of hacking in and pulling some basic information off of Foundation servers without being detected. For the other information they needed, they turned to some good old-fashioned torture, which is often the most effective method when you need some quick results. Of course, while the cult's grip on sanity may have been a little tenuous, they weren't stupid. While gathering their intel, they also made sure to find out what exactly they were up against. SCP-6662 was being held in a humanoid containment cell and guarded by on-site Task Force Town 9, better known as the Belligerent Bodyguards. These aren't lazy, donut-chomping mall cops. These are a heavily trained, heavily armed fighting force. Though the cultists had one thing that these Foundation soldiers didn't: the element of surprise. For everything to go off perfectly, Brother Marsh's plans would have to be executed within a single day, and they were already on the clock. Tau 9 had been charged with tracking down any new SCP-2662 cults and dismantling them, and Brother Marsh knew that it was only a matter of time before the Foundation tracked them down and did the same to them. If they wanted any chance of freeing the tentacled god, then they'd need to strike quickly and with overwhelming force. The SCP-2662 worshippers were able to secure the addresses of the 5 key Foundation personnel and station members outside each of them, including one who could realistically imitate each. They waited for night to fall and broke into each of their homes as they slept. What followed was a sequence of ruthless and efficient murders done in the cause of freeing their god. Dr. Gutierrez was shot in the head while he slept. Sidney Levitt and Jordan Broche were both stabbed to death before either even realized what was happening. Thompson, who'd gotten up to use the bathroom, went down in a hail of machine gun fire. Jillian Larson had seen that masked figures were breaking into her home and attempted to flee, but was caught and beaten to death by cultists in her hallway. It was a strange irony that people whose day jobs entailed working with some of the most dangerous and nightmarish anomalies imaginable were murdered in their homes by nothing more than regular humans. So far, Brother Marsh's plan had gone perfectly, with all 5 key personnel murdered within a 2-minute period. Next, the selected doppelgangers stole clothes from their victims' closets and were handed the correct forged documentation. The next morning, each replacement began their journeys to the site where the tentacled god was being contained, while the rest of the cult armed themselves in preparation for their own part in the plan. Nobody at the Foundation seemed to notice anything amiss when the 5 arrived on site. When you work for the SCP Foundation, more mental energy is devoted to following the rules that keep you alive than to memorizing the faces of all your coworkers, and each one slipped neatly into position, disappearing into the familiarity of office life. But infiltrating the site was one thing. Getting past the belligerent bodyguards and into the cell of the tentacled god would be another thing entirely. That's where the rest of the cult would come into play. Heavily armed with whatever firearms they could get their hands on, the rest of the devotees of the tentacled god, Brother Marsh included, would attack the containment site head-on. In the ensuing chaos, the 5 cultists who had already infiltrated the site could take advantage of the distraction and break into the containment chamber. It was perfect. They launched their attack from the outside and from within. When Brother Marsh declared that the time was right, the assault began. A legion of gun-wielding cultists seemed to spring out of nowhere and started shooting up the warehouse that was a front for the containment site. The site quickly mobilized guards and task force members to take on the sudden threat, and just as Brother Marsh had anticipated, the site director called on the majority of Tau 9 to help repel the violent cultists from their perimeter. Tau 9 obeyed, leaving 3 task force members behind to guard SCP-2662's containment chamber. They expected to be guarding the cell from rampaging religious zealots seeking an audience with their god. What they didn't expect was a group of 5 Foundation employees walking right up to them and opening fire, killing 2 Tau 9 members and taking the 3rd as hostage. While the war was being waged outside, the infiltrators had found the tentacled god's containment cell in the low-risk humanoid ward. Their hostage insisted that using him wouldn't give them any leverage. The rest of his team would neutralize the whole group, him included, if that's what it took to stop them. The infiltrators explained that using him as leverage was never their intention. He wasn't a hostage at all. He was a sacrifice. The cultists of the tentacled god detonated explosives, creating a hole in the wall and finally giving them access to their deity. They climbed through and gazed upon him in awe. There stood SCP-6662, twice as tall as a regular man, with 10 huge tentacles emerging from its back. In their months of envisioning this creature, they'd pictured it sitting on a throne made of thousands of human bones, ready to dictate its commands to the obedient liberators. What they certainly didn't expect was to see the tentacled god hunched over a computer screen. Still, gods work in mysterious ways. So they stuck to the plan and began chanting. They pulled out a sacrificial dagger and began sacrificing their captured Tau 9 member. It was at this point that SCP-6662 turned and saw what they were doing with a look of pure horror. He rose up from his computer, his headphones getting caught as he did so. He told them to go away, that he didn't want them here, and that them murdering people in his bedroom like this was inconsiderate and disgusting. The cultists became even more confused. Why wasn't their god accepting their offerings? What were they doing wrong? They tried more chanting and painting arcane symbols on the floor in blood, but this just seemed to make the creature angrier. He told them, in a tone more fitting for a teenage boy than a Lovecraftian god, to just leave him alone so he could play his video games. This was seriously not cool. The cultists were baffled. They told the tentacled god that they were there to free him. He replied that he didn't need saving, that crazy stalkers like them were why he turned himself into the Foundation in the first place. Before the cultist infiltrators could get another word in, the remaining members of Tau 9 stormed into the containment cell and gunned them down with surgical precision. The war outside was already over. Brother Marsh and the rest of the cultists were all killed in the firefight. Tau 9 didn't look the least bit surprised upon entering 2662's cell. This was a common occurrence, unfortunately. They had to deal with an attempted cult invasion every few months, because SCP-2662's main anomalous ability is inspiring violent cults who relentlessly track down and worship it with arcane and bloodthirsty rituals. The problem is, 2662 doesn't do this consciously, and definitely doesn't like the results. That's why he's under the voluntary care of the SCP Foundation, who keeps him amused with video games and reading material, while fending off the deranged cults who try to invade and abduct him. Following the termination of the devotees of the tentacled god, just one of many cults who'd broken into 2662's containment cell, the remaining Tau 9 members apologized to the tentacled creature for the disturbance, allowing him to return to his gaming. They assured him that it'd probably be at least a few more months before something like this happened again. SCP-2662's cell was repaired, and the Foundation returned to its task of seeking out would-be cult emancipators, because for the SCP Foundation, it's not always about the anomaly that's being kept in containment, but what's being kept out.
It goes without saying that the SCP Foundation archives are filled with some terrifying monsters. Even the deadliest creatures can, in theory, be defeated, or at least soundly avoided. After all, they're just flesh and blood, or in some cases, metal or concrete. But what if reality as you know it one day just broke? Or worse, you were transported to a reality so frightening and alien to our own that death seemed like the only escape. But you couldn't even give yourself that. This brings us to today's topic, the terrifying alternate reality of SCP-3001. The Foundation is no stranger to freaky alternate dimensions, but what was experienced by Joint Lead Researcher Dr. Robert Scranton at Site-120 is a truly unique nightmare. Co-managed by his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, Site-120 is a facility largely designated for research into SCPs with dangerous reality warping capabilities in order to mitigate future containment breaches. Reality warpers are among some of the more perplexing and dangerous SCPs, from the pocket dimension creating SCP-106 to the SCP creating Dr. Wondertainment and everything in between. Scranton and Lang's goal to further study such entities was an admirable one, if a little overambitious. And on January 2, 2000, during the testing of a new technology created by the Foundation's leading power couple, disaster finally struck. Scranton and Lang had already been the brains behind one of the Foundation's most valuable tools in the fight against reality-bending SCPs, the Scranton Reality Anchors. Their follow-up, the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer, or LSS, likely would have been an even more advanced variant of their earlier invention, and should have been a huge success for the team. But things didn't turn out that way. Dr. Scranton and several other researchers were gathered in Reality Lab A performing routine tests on the LSS prototypes. While other technicians ran diagnostics tests, Scranton stood at the control panel, the blinking red light above the console confirming that everything was going according to plan. But as anyone who's fallen victim to one of the Foundation's many anomalies will tell you, just because you've done everything correctly doesn't mean you're safe. Scranton began operating the machine, not knowing that something was rumbling up towards him from below. Without warning, a sudden, unexpected burst of seismic activity rocked the entire base. Researchers grabbed onto whatever was closest as the world shook around them. In his panic, Dr. Scranton clung to the LSS control panel as the seismic blast fried the circuits and kicked it into overdrive. There was a blast of magnificent blinding light, and when the rumbling stopped, not only was the doctor gone, he had been erased from reality as we know it. The earthquake had caused a deadly malfunction in the machine meant to stabilize reality, and instead tore a rift in it, dragging the unfortunate doctor and the control panel into oblivion. His wife, Dr. Lang, and the many researchers who idolized him were devastated by his unexpected demise at the hand of what should have been his crowning achievement. The one silver lining was that this reality-ripping event had almost definitely eliminated the doctor quickly and painlessly. As far as the Foundation and his loved ones were concerned, Scranton's death had been immediate and complete, a luxury afforded to few Foundation employees who die anomalous deaths. But sadly, that isn't how Dr. Scranton's story, or the story of SCP-6061, ends. No, this is where it all begins. How do we know all this? In the hellish new place where Scranton had been transported, the control panel from the LSS that he'd been clinging to for dear life had been transported with him, and continued to record audio data from this anomalous location. Not that Dr. Scranton realized it, not at first anyway. As far as he knew, he'd suddenly been transported into a pitch-black location. No sights, no sounds, no sense. True nothingness. At first, the doctor was confused. One second he was testing out his new technology, and the next he was quite literally nowhere. In spite of his current situation, the doctor was still an intelligent and rational man. He took a moment to compose himself, hoping that in time his eyes would adjust to the new darkness around him. But that moment never came. The darkness remained perfectly absolute. Much like the darkness in another reality-defying SCP, the deadly endless staircase known as SCP-087, the dark seemed thick, almost like you could touch it. The doctor, not wanting to give himself to despair and die in this impossible place, and with no other options seemingly available, began walking. Either he'd find his way out, or the Foundation would find him. No need to panic. It may have altered the doctor's temperament if he knew that the Foundation already assumed he was dead, and that no search party was going to come looking for him. Still, logic dictates that if a person walks for long enough, they're bound to find something. The problem Scranton was about to face was that SCP-6001 doesn't run by any kind of conventional logic. He walked and walked and walked, but he didn't seem to get any nearer to or farther from anything. But how could he even know? After all, in total darkness, there aren't any landmarks to assist in navigation. The doctor walked and paced and screamed for days on end, but he made no progress. He was alone in an empty world. He had no choice though, so he kept walking and walking and walking for 11 days. During that time, he felt his hunger and thirst grow. He was in terrible pain from a mix of starvation and dehydration, but the release of death didn't seem to come for him. He was going to have to learn the rules of this new place the hard way, and it grimly dawned on Dr. Scranton that dying in this place might not even be the worst possible outcome. He paced and repeated facts to himself, hoping to ground himself in the moment and avoid the panic that could so easily set in. Name, Robert Scranton. Age, 39. Birthday, September 19th, 1961. Favorite color, blue. Favorite song, Living on a Prayer. Wife, Anna. Little by little, the words seemed to turn to nonsense in his mouth as the terror grew. Just as he felt like he was about to lose his mind, he noticed something. A small oasis in the endless darkness of SCP-6061. The glowing red light on the LSS control panel. Where had it come from? And how was it still recording? The doctor had no idea, but he was grateful for any kind of familiarity in this strange darkness around him. Perhaps the LSS could be the key to saving him, or at least figuring out what on earth was going on here. Whatever the case, there was no denying that having the panel here was better than nothing. At least, when it was found, if it was ever found, then people would know what had happened to him. As the days passed and he continued to mysteriously survive, Dr. Scranton deduced that one didn't need food or water to survive continually in SCP-6001. The location had an anomalous effect on its inhabitants. As the days passed and turned to weeks of wandering in the darkness, Dr. Scranton further deduced that he was no longer in his home dimension. This was an entirely separate pocket dimension, much like the one possessed by SCP-106, but featureless, a perfect self-contained void. Now dimly illuminated by the red light of the panel, Dr. Scranton explored further into the void around him. He traveled for months on end, the pain of his deficiencies growing by the day, but found he was getting nowhere. All things considered, he wasn't even sure he was moving, or whether reality and darkness were swirling around him like a thick liquid. Rather than walking on a single flat surface, he was moving in all directions across a three-dimensional plane. The space-time continuum appeared to be entirely broken here, where movement is more defined by the conscious intention to move than any real geographical repositioning. Dr. Scranton knew that this place broke every single one of Kijel's laws of reality parameters. And from his years working with a plethora of reality warpers in Site-120, he had a theory for why this pocket dimension was so strange. It had an extraordinarily weak Hume field. Before we get back to Dr. Scranton's semi-living nightmare, we need a quick primer on Hume theory and why having a weak Hume field is such a problem. A Hume is a unit of measurement for the strength and amount of reality in a given location or being. In an area with an incredibly low Hume field relative to our world, such as SCP-6001, universe breaches and anomalous incidents rise significantly. At the time of his being trapped there, SCP-6001 had the lowest number of Humes in any recorded environment, making it a phenomenally anomalous zone. It was for this reason that starvation and dehydration never took hold of him despite causing him great pain. And the worst by far was yet to come. Dr. Scranton wasn't trapped in this dimension for weeks or even months. He was trapped in the darkness for years, and it took a nightmarish toll on his body and mind. The small flashing red light on his LSS control panel became his only friend, and as the years drew on, he would hold entire conversations with his only source of illumination. He knew that his days were numbered. If he didn't escape the dimension within around 3 years, the Hume field would diffuse further, and he would be left in a truly horrific state. But based on how little headway he'd made in the time he'd been there, he didn't feel optimistic. He kept speaking into the recorder, if only to break the silence and prevent him from going completely insane. But even that would only hold it off for so long. Alone and talking to himself endlessly in the darkness, Dr. Scranton could feel his mind slipping as the confines of the pocket dimension constricted and his body began to change. The low Hume field slowly diffused his physical matter, destroying the physical integrity of his body, but never being merciful enough to actually let him die. In his haunting audio logs, the doctor described his hands as diffusing and thinning out like spiderwebs. Over time, there was less and less of him, and what was left wasn't entirely human. As Scranton's Hume level lowered to equalize with that of SCP-3001, the lines between his body and the LSS control console began to blur in a twisted marriage of warped flesh and machine. The Lang Scranton stabilizer was anything but stable. Before his mind and body became something else entirely, the doctor still had the presence of mind to finally realize how he'd come to be in this terrible place. The LSS had opened a wormhole known as a Class C broken entry into a paradoxical pocket dimension between layers of reality and taken him through it. He'd slipped through a crack in reality into absolute darkness, and now he was stuck with a fate far worse than death. How do we know any of this? Much like the event in the first place, it's a total accident. Testing superior reality-bending technology almost 6 years after the disappearance caused the sudden return of the missing LSS to Site-120's reality labs. The only trace of Dr. Scranton that it brought back with it was the blood and viscera that coated the console, much to the abject horror of his still-grieving wife, Dr. Anna Lang. To this day, Dr. Scranton, formerly one of the Foundation's brightest minds, remains trapped in the nightmare of SCP-6001. His current condition, whether the Doctor is still alive after 20 years of being warped by the low Hume field of 3001's darkened confines, is still unknown. But for the Doctor's own sake, we hope he's been dead for quite some time, because few things on Earth are as horrifying as the alternative. On an ordinary day in 1991, a young man known by the initials JS went on a hike with 4 of his friends on the wooded outskirts of their small town. Everything seemed perfectly normal until JS began to feel a strange sense of familiarity, like he had been in this spot before. He couldn't shake this weird feeling, but thought nothing more of it. Little did he know that this was a sign of deadly things to come. Several hours after first experiencing that sense of deja vu, JS was found by the side of the road, covered in cuts and scratches, with his friends nowhere to be found. This is the story of SCP-939, an unforgettable monster that you'll never remember. There was no way for JS to know that the unsettling feeling he felt and the horrors that followed it were the result of an experiment conducted by the SCP Foundation, an experiment with deadly, unforeseen consequences. JS and his friends were exposed to a substance known only as AMN-C227 as part of a series of tests performed by the SCP Foundation, intended to determine the effectiveness of this substance as a deliberate amnestic. Dealing with as many mysterious, secret creatures and objects as they do, the SCP Foundation has long needed a way to tamper with the memories of those exposed to the Foundation's various prisoners and test subjects. And when the Foundation discovered AMN-C227, it seemed like it might be perfect for this purpose. So where did AMN-C227 come from? Over a year before the incident with JS and his friends, the SCP Foundation captured SCP-939. SCP-939 is a species of endothermic predators that live and hunt in packs. They are designated Keter class and regarded as highly dangerous and hostile to human life. Native to caves, they have no eyes, translucent red skin, and stand at an average of 2.2 meters tall, with an average weight of 250 kilograms. They have 4 limbs, each ending in 3-fingered claws and a 4th opposable digit resembling a thumb. In addition to their sharp claws, their mouths are filled with red fang-like teeth that reach up to 6 centimeters in length. In place of their absent eyes, they have light-sensitive spots running along their backs, which are covered in spines believed to detect changes in air pressure and flow. In addition to their many other terrifying attributes, the internal anatomy of SCP-939 poses a biological mystery. These creatures have no circulatory system and no digestive tract. That's right, in spite of being predators seemingly acting on a need to feed, they have no stomach. Instead, when they eat, their food builds up in their respiratory system until its presence inhibits function, and then it is regurgitated. In spite of being a creature that should not, under any logical conditions, be able to live, SCP-939 continues to persist, and is even capable of giving birth to live young after a gestation period of 12 months. The SCP Foundation was able to study a litter of these young that were born in captivity in September of 1992, though the creatures remain just as much of a scientific mystery as they were upon first discovery. Everything about them seems to defy the logic of the natural world, which, to be fair, is really nothing new for the Foundation. The respiratory system of SCP-939 was found to exhale small traces of an airborne amnestic substance, given the name AMN-C227. This compound blocks the formation of memories for the duration of exposure to it, plus a 30-minute period following the exposure, give or take a few minutes. It is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and completely undetectable in the bloodstream after only 60 minutes. AMN-C227 was approved for use as a Class C amnestic by the SCP Foundation in 1990, following some initial tests. However, after one particular incident involving a young man and his friends, the official use of AMN-C227 was suspended. JS and 3 of his 4 friends were previously given a dose of AMN-C227, though the details of why they were given the amnestic has since been stricken from the record. Several months after being exposed to AMN-C227, JS and his friends went out on their ill-fated hiking trip. While hiking, JS was suddenly overcome with a sense of déjà vu. When he mentioned it to his friends, 3 of them agreed that they had felt it too. One of the group, another young man who had not been exposed to AMN-C227, was uncomfortable and decided to go home. JS and the remaining 3 members of the group made the choice to stay in the woods and try to determine what was triggering the unusual feeling of familiarity. As they got closer and closer to a large cave near the hiking trail, the sense of having been there before grew stronger and stronger. Armed with only one flashlight and a foolish curiosity, the 4 went inside the cave. They made their way deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkness, not knowing why they felt this way or what they might find inside. None of the group could explain just what felt so familiar, only that the further they made their way into the cave, the more pronounced the feeling became. It was getting late, and they knew they should have been afraid to venture so deep into a cave with only one light source and no knowledge of what lay inside. But still, they pressed on. One of the group remarked that they should turn back, but the others refused to listen. They wanted to know what they were getting close to, what was drawing them deeper and deeper into the cave. Unfortunately for them, they would get their answer. In the heart of the cave was a pack of SCP-939, waiting patiently for their prey to wander into their domain. There are no witnesses to account for what exactly happened to JS and his companions, but we can reasonably piece the events together from what happened after. Once the friends reached the heart of the cave, the creatures were on them in seconds, raking them with their sharp claws and biting with their fangs. SCP-939 are larger and stronger than most people, so it was probably not much of a fight. However, while his friends were being devoured, JS was somehow able to scramble out of the cave and make his way into the woods in search of help. Under the influence of the AMN-C227 that had built up in the cave from the presence of the pack of SCP-939, JS lost a large portion of his memory of the event. He found himself on the side of the highway late at night, seriously injured and his clothes ripped. An officer found him there and asked him to stay still and remain calm until an ambulance could arrive. JS was still in a panic and attempted to run away from the officer, begging to be released so that he could get away. He babbled incoherently about the color red, screaming over and over again about the red, though when prompted, he could not explain what the red he was screaming about referred to. His friends were not with him. Just as the officer managed to calm JS, the ambulance arrived. Its flashing red lights sent him into another frenzy, and he attempted to escape custody, claiming that the red lights were going to get him. The official police report described JS as perhaps being under the influence of a powerful hallucinogen, that he was just having a bad trip, but the SCP Foundation knew better. The Foundation conducted an interview with JS about his experience, and determined that SCP-939 was certainly involved. As part of their cover-up effort, they strongly implicated JS in the disappearance and the death of his friends. He was convicted of manslaughter, though the bodies of his friends were never found. It is rumored that the SCP Foundation hired him on a prison work release program, and that he now works as a member of the janitorial staff at one of the Foundation's facilities. This incident led to the suspension of the use of AMN-C227, as it revealed some vital and disturbing information about the compound's side effects. After the exposure to AMN-C227, a person who found themselves exposed to it again would experience a sense of familiarity and felt compelled to investigate the source of this feeling. Essentially, anyone treated with AMN-C227 are not made aware of the existence and danger of SCP-939 would become a perfect victim, primed to be attracted to dens of SCP-939. It is likely that this side effect is not a coincidence, but rather a deliberate hunting tactic designed to attract prey that had somehow managed to escape. With no memory of their attack at the hands of SCP-939, this previous intended prey would find themselves drawn to the same den or even a new one, not knowing that they were walking back into near certain death. While the SCP Foundation suspended the use of AMN-C227 as a Class C amnestic, they did recruit a team of SCP field operatives to take advantage of this side effect. This team of operatives were deliberately administered a dose of AMN-C227 and briefed on its effects, as well as the dangers of following the feeling of déjà vu should it surface in the field. These infected officers were essentially used as bloodhounds, relying on any sense of unusual familiarity to sniff out new dens of SCP-939 so they could be captured and contained by the Foundation. As far as we know, this operation is still ongoing today. However, now that the Foundation has a sufficient number of specimens to study, additional dens of SCP-939 that are discovered are ordered to be immediately destroyed. As for the SCP-939 still in captivity, they are contained in environmentally regulated and negatively pressured cells with walls of reinforced concrete. The doors to the cells are airtight to prevent the leakage of any AMN-C227. And any personnel that interact with one of the creatures is required to wear level C hazmat gear to avoid exposure and follow decontamination procedures upon exiting the cell. All SCP-939 have subdermal tracking devices implanted to find them in the event of escape. Only one SCP-939 has given birth in the time that the creatures have been in captivity. Strangely, SCP-939 young look indistinguishable from human infants and change their physical appearance at some yet unknown point as they age. If any more offspring are produced, they will immediately be separated from the parent and studied. All that we know is that they are found in caves in the woods outside of a small town. It could be any town, even yours. So, if you're ever out hiking and struck with a sudden feeling of déjà vu, don't investigate. Don't get curious. Just go home. It might just save your life.
What's in a name? Ancient folklore and fairy tales sometimes tell of the importance of names, that they can hold the power to summon or banish. Whether you buy into the superstition or not, you'd be unwise to ignore the power a name can have, especially if you ever dare to venture into SCP-4000. Why? Use your own name too many times in this extra-dimensional forest, and you may find that what walks out isn't you at all. At least once a year, the Foundation leads an expedition into SCP-4000 to explore this Keter-class dimension. But if you go down to those woods today, then you'd better follow the rules. Remember, the Foundation has implemented these guidelines for your own safety, and it's in your best interests to follow them. First and foremost, when referencing anything inside SCP-4000, be it a person, place, or thing, you cannot, under any circumstances, use names or titles. Communication is key when exploring SCP-4000, and making use of specific descriptors will deter any adverse effects on your journey. For example, you may want to refer to the location of SCP-4000 as the woods where you need to speak carefully, an apt description for such a place. Of course, there is a reason the Foundation doesn't provide a handy flashcard of alternative descriptors for any personnel taking part in the annual mission into SCP-4000. Nothing found there can be referred to with any consistent name, so it's perhaps advisable to look over a thesaurus and expand your vocabulary before visiting SCP-4000, as you'll need to come up with a lot of different ways to refer to the people and creatures around you. But don't worry, the Foundation will be able to train you how to properly refer to SCP-4000 in both written and verbal communication. In a similar vein, the second rule states that no personnel member should respond to their own name while in SCP-4000. Naturally, you and your fellow expedition team will not be alone in the forest you find yourselves in. The denizens of SCP-4000 are perpetually mutating creatures, some appearing to be trustworthy while others are hostile. It is for personnel members' own safety that no consistent names or titles are used to refer to each other in conversation. This has been known to cause personnel returning from SCP-4000 to experience vivid hallucinations, and in some instances has led to the appearances of creatures found in SCP-4000 in our world. Thirdly, when interacting with the life forms residing in SCP-4000, personnel are advised to accept any gifts that they're offered, but are warned to, under no circumstances, consume anything that is given to them while inside the forest. Finally, and above all, do not divulge any name, nickname, codename, alias, or any other personal designation when interacting with any native entities, and disregard any designator that an inhabitant of SCP-4000 attempts to assign to you. Personnel must, however, remain courteous in the presence of any native creature of SCP-4000 and treat these entities with respect and formality. Access to SCP-4000 can only be achieved by performing Procedure 4000 Halloway, a ritual requiring a steady flame in an indoor fireplace fueled by only organic kindling. Personnel are required to combine the powdered bones of one male lion, one male red fox, and a baleen whale, and cast these into the fire with a personal possession holding strong sentimental value to the staff member performing 4000 Halloway. Next, personnel are to add 3 feathers of a bird, such as a raven or crow, and must respond with the correct counter phrases once the fire begins to emit a voice. If these conditions are met and the correct response is given, Foundation personnel will gain access to the entry point of SCP-4000. If any error is made during the course of performing Procedure 4000 Halloway, then under no circumstances should this ritual be repeated. Staff are urged to apologize for any incorrect actions, then refrain from engaging in this procedure in the future. Should Procedure 4000 Halloway be completed successfully, Foundation personnel will find themselves arriving in the access point to SCP-4000, emerging from the mouth of an old well in the center of the forest. Exploration teams sent into SCP-4000 are advised that this dimension does not adhere to the laws of physical space that personnel will be accustomed to. There is a single, confirmed safe route that must be used when traversing the forest of SCP-4000, a dirt path leading in a circuit both beginning and terminating at the entry point. Previous attempts to map the landscape of SCP-4000 all confirm that the only way to safely exit this dimension is to follow the entire length of the path in one direction until eventually returning to the well. You have been warned. Any attempt to travel back to the direction you came in will result in a loss of contact with the rest of the expedition team. As mentioned, SCP-4000 is home to a number of entities, often noted to be undergoing continuous and dramatic changes in form. These physiological mutations appear to occur whenever these creatures are unobserved, making distinguishing between them difficult. When questioned about the exact nature of these changes, the inhabitants of SCP-4000 claim to have no control over them and express distress and dissatisfaction when said changes occur. Guidelines have been put in place by the Foundation regarding the interactions between personnel and creatures found in the forest, and adhering to the rules regarding the use of consistent names and titles remains vitally important. The native creatures appear semi-humanoid and are reported to be highly temperamental. Should any staff member happen to offend one of these natives, they may be subjected to anything from verbal assault to acts of extreme physical violence from the SCP-4000 resident. If any Foundation personnel further question why there are so many rules when visiting SCP-4000, then they need to look no further than the discoveries and fate of Dr. Eugene Japers, who during his initial expedition to SCP-4000 in 2005 encountered a humanoid native entity whose head resembled a rabbit's. As the pair shared a polite conversation, the rabbit-like creature made an inquiry regarding Dr. Japers' name, asking, "How is your name?" Keeping to the rules, Dr. Japers did not divulge any name or other form of title to the creature at this time. However, Japers remained courteous and polite during the interaction. The rabbit responded with the following: "Are you simple? I'm merely asking how your name is. My name has smelt of raspberries lately, I think, or snapdragons perhaps. It's so hard to tell these days, but one makes an effort." In his reply, Dr. Japers made a reference to his own name as having tasted rather tart as of late, before concluding the conversation with the rabbit entity. Upon returning to the SCP-4000 forest 3 years later, Dr. Japers was met with the same creature and once again engaged in conversation with it. After briefly discussing their previous encounter, Dr. Japers was able to turn their exchange towards something the rabbit had mentioned before, about finding it difficult to describe his own name. When asked to clarify this point, the rabbit replied, "I can only assume it's because of how long we've been apart, my name and I, that is. It's a good name, a proud name, I'm fairly sure. By this point though, it's probably decayed from its former grandeur, if it even still exists." After this mention of its relationship with its own name, it should be noted that the rabbit referred to Dr. Japers by the title Fellow Scholar. The third and final encounter between Dr. Japers and this entity came in 2013, after the doctor was sent into SCP-4000 with instructions to conduct a more thorough interview with the subject. It was during their third conversation that the Rabbit Man revealed details of a long-forgotten war between human beings and the residents of SCP-4000. Apparently, these creatures, the Fae, do not originate from the forest in which they now reside, and according to the Rabbit Man's claims, were born in our world. "Much as it grieves me to say, we were betrayed," the rabbit explained. "We had fought side by side, in the war against that factory. We had done nothing but help them, and what did they do? They destroyed us. They took so many of our lives and all of our names. Some of us fled here when the war was just beginning, but not many. Still, though, I don't hate them. It has been assumed by some that the Foundation was directly involved in whatever may have wiped out the Fae, causing them to either retreat or be banished to the forest of SCP-4000. An additional assumption has been made that whatever weapons were used on these creatures is directly responsible for their constantly shifting state, rendering them without their own names or identities. Whatever the case may be, it was during their conversation that Dr. Japers, in reference to their second encounter, referred to himself as a fellow scholar to the rabbit in order to coax information from him. However, in doing so, the Doctor had unwittingly accepted the title that the native entity had given him. By mistakenly responding to the name Fellow Scholar, the Doctor had broken the rules of interacting with the creatures of SCP-4000, an easy mistake, but a costly one. The Doctor would later leave SCP-4000, traversing the safe path back to the well, and Dr. Japers vanished shortly after his exit from SCP-4000. His whereabouts are currently unknown. The Foundation has made several attempts to investigate his untimely disappearance, but to this day, he remains missing, and the fur left on the inside of his expedition gear displayed no strange properties. The single goal, it would seem, of the creatures residing in SCP-4000 is the theft of names. However, this naturally extends far beyond the Dimension's definition of identity theft. Though an unfortunate blunder, Dr. Japers allowed the friendly nature and demeanor of the rabbit entity to trick him into accepting the name Fellow Scholar. By giving Dr. Japers a name, the rabbit was free to steal not only his name, but his very identity. While it is unclear how this transference is achieved by the creatures, it is due to the risk of this that the Foundation employs such strict rules for any research team tasked with traveling to the forest of SCP-4000. Make no mistake, names have more power than we realize, and this is evident in few places more so than SCP-4000, a pocket dimension where ever-changing survivors of a forgotten massacre exist as identities alone. Remember, a name is a powerful thing, whichever side of the well you find yourself on. Your name binds you to who you are, but if your name becomes someone else's, then one else of yours becomes theirs too.
It was just a job. You were meant to be mopping floors and cleaning toilets at the Johnston Labs and Pharmaceuticals Research Center for minimum wage, and you were happy about it, grateful for any kind of employment. You didn't even know that the company signing your checks was the SCP Foundation, an organization dedicated to securing and containing anomalies and protecting humanity from their negative effects at any cost. And today, you're going to find out exactly how steep that cost can be. The Johnston Labs and Pharmaceuticals Research Center isn't actually a research center at all. It's a Foundation front business, with a building solely dedicated to the containment of a single anomaly, SCP-3280. But again, you're just the janitor. It's not like they would bother telling you what's being contained here. If it breaks out, you won't even know what's killing you until it's too late. It begins like most classic horror stories on a dark and stormy night. You're mopping up a silent hallway, whistling a little tune to yourself, when rain starts hammering down on the window next to you. Not long after, you see a bolt of lightning split the distant sky, followed by an immense thundercrack. Soon after, you hear screaming and panicking from below, frantic footsteps, then the flashing lights and sirens. You think back to your employee orientation. These flashing lights and wailing sirens can only mean one thing: containment breach. You run for it, not even knowing what you're running from. You bring your mop and bucket with you, perhaps just out of habit. You seek refuge in the only place in the facility that truly seems to belong to you, the broom closet. The alarm blares as you lock yourself in the closet. You're shaking with terror and can hear the screaming of your colleagues. You hear more noises. Running, scrambling, a wet dripping sound, gunshots, and then silence. All this time you can't help but wonder, why isn't anybody coming to help us? After a while, the only thing you can hear is the rain and the distant thunder. It's been hours. You've only managed to stave off dehydration by drinking the filthy water from the mop sink, but at least it seems like the chaos outside has died down. Carefully, you open the door and peek out of the closet. Darkness, but no detectable movement. Now's your chance and you make a break for it, creeping down the hall. The dark hallway is suddenly lit up by lightning, and you can see that there are bodies everywhere. You step over the corpse of Dr. Cawthron, one of the few scientists working here who actually knew your name. If you can make it to the security office, you might be able to radio for help, or maybe access a computer terminal. On the way to the office, you hear another horrific scream start to echo through the complex before it's cut off by a thunderclap. You have to ignore it though, and push on. When you enter the security room, you see that the head security officer, Nichols, is already dead. His body has been cut open from neck to groin, gutted. The anomaly, whatever it is, has already been here. You access the computer terminal and open the file for SCP-3280. You're warned that as janitorial staff, you have level 0 clearance, and as a result, information will be omitted from the files you access. It doesn't matter. You press on and open up the file. Both the object class and the description have been redacted. You can only see the special containment procedures. They dictate that 3280 is to remain contained at the Johnston Labs and Pharmaceuticals Research Center until long-term containment procedures can be drawn up. If the entity ever reaches beyond sublevel 2, the facility enters full lockdown mode. Not even information is allowed in or out of the facility, as this could result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. In other words, nobody is coming to save you. The only other information on the page is a picture of a lightning storm, much like the one you find yourself in right now. Lightning flashes in the hall. You dart around paranoid, knowing the anomaly could be anywhere. All you can hear now is the quiet drip, drip, drip of blood coming from the body of Security Officer Nichols. Whatever this thing had done to him looked painful. You try to remember him as he was in life, and then a revelation hits you. A security officer probably has a lot better clearance than a janitor. You feel around Nichols' mutilated torso until you find his keycard. Thankfully, Nichols was the kind of guy who'd write his password on the underside of this card so he wouldn't forget it. You easily gain access to the Foundation servers with his login credentials. You now have level 2 security clearance. The terminal gives you the option to view security footage taken throughout the site. You're given access to every camera still working after the containment breach and the subsequent carnage. You select the camera feed for the second floor barracks. There you see researcher Jensen hanging from a makeshift noose attached to his bunk. There's a puddle underneath his corpse. You access the feed from the second floor east wing. There you see Dr. Emmanuel stumbling down a dark corridor. His movements are oddly listless, like he's in a trance. Suddenly, there's another flash of lightning and a crack of thunder. Dr. Emmanuel clutches his gut in pain and crumples to the floor. You access the camera feed from the first floor entrance. It seems that the whole area is flooded. Is this because of the storm? In a panic, many lower-tier staff members had tried to escape, defying the lockdown protocols and the special containment procedures. Now they're floating face down in the water, all dead. You access the camera feed from sublevel 2 and see another corpse lying in the corner. He's wearing an orange jumpsuit, D-class. No idea why he was down there. The only other notable thing in the basement was a burst pipe, leaking and spraying more water everywhere. With trembling fingers, you select the camera feed for the first floor cafeteria. The whole room is practically underwater. The only evidence of the massacre that must have taken place are the fragments of clothing floating on the surface of the water. That, and the fleshy pink slurry forming at the bottom of the windows. It reminds you of the gooey meat runoff in chicken nugget factories. You close your eyes and try to center yourself. It's violent chaos. Looking at more of it isn't getting you anywhere. Instead, you put those new level 2 security access credentials to good use and hop back onto the file for SCP-6280. You think to yourself, there has to be something I can use on here. But even as you wait for the file to load, some part of you knows that time is running out for you. Perhaps it's the stress, or the fear, or the filthy mop water you drank, but you're feeling the pressure start to mount, physically. Your stomach is beginning to ache. You can see blurry shapes moving in the corners of your eyes. It's getting harder to focus your vision, and harder still to quiet the terrified voices in your mind. But you can't get up, not without knowing what is doing this to you. The containment class for SCP-3280 is now declassified, Euclid, and once more, the special containment procedures have altered too. They now explain that every week, a new member of D-Class personnel is to be deposited into the entity's lair in Sublevel 2 through Subterranean Access Point Gamma. The D-Class, or more accurately, the Sacrifices, are to be told lies about why exactly they need to descend to the lowest point in the facility. They're even given a working flashlight and a defensive nightstick to create the illusion that the Foundation expects them to ever return from the depths. Little do they know, they also have a tiny transmitter sewn into their jumpsuit. This broadcasts a frequency that will attract an eager SCP-3280 to the D-Class's location, like a dinner bell only it can hear. The file specifies that SCP-3280 always prefers live prey. Well, at least that explains the dead D-class in sublevel 2, you think, hoping that it will somehow overwhelm the dizziness you're feeling, or the nagging pain in your gut. You read on. Somehow the file's tone becomes even more severe. It says that failure to maintain the containment of SCP-3280 will not only trigger a lockdown, it will always call in the intervention of 2 different mobile task forces, MTF Iota-12, the Silencers, and Tau-4, also known as Water Everywhere. If 12 hours pass from the point of initial containment breach and the O5 Council hasn't been given the all-clear signal by one of these teams, preparation begins for an imminent XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. Just reading the words sends you into a cold sweat. End of the world? What on earth is this creature? Finally, you reach the description. You get to find out what this horrifying entity actually is. But the last thing you expect is the first sentence in the file to read, SCP-3280 is a sapient entity composed of a fluid physically identical to water, capable of traveling roughly 2.5 kilometers per hour. It's water. It's literally a living, thinking blob of water. As you read on, the concerning details pile up. Any water that the anomalous SCP-3280 water touches, it integrates it into its own mass. But anytime water is separated from this mass, it remains anomalous and continues to act independently. When the creature was first discovered, it was a mere 66.4 liters in volume. Now it's around 2,500. The water infected by SCP-3280 is hostile to all humans, and not just in a defensive manner. SCP-3280 will actively seek out human prey, and when it finds them, it forces its mass into any available body orifice, including the victim's pores. This can happen in such a subtle manner that you may not even notice yourself being infiltrated. But below this, the file has a list of symptoms for those experiencing 3280 infiltration: loss of motor control, weakening of the micturition reflex, visual hallucinations, and abdominal pain. As you read the words, your stomach gives another painful churn, almost like something is moving around inside of you. It's all coming together. You read on. The file states that SCP-3280 is so difficult to contain because it exhibits claustrophobic tendencies. Anytime it's placed inside a container, whether organic or inorganic, it escapes with pressurized water jets that travel at over 255 miles per hour. If the water is inside a human, it may literally explode out of them, killing them in the process. Your jittering eyes turn to the gutted body of Security Officer Nichols. It all makes sense now. Everything is becoming clearer as the pain in your stomach builds in its intensity. The file goes on to say that if SCP-3280 escapes sublevel 2, it may be impossible to contain again. If 3280 ever escaped the site proper, it would indeed cause an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario to unfold, as 3280 merged with our water cycle and destroyed all of humanity on a global scale. It would become truly impossible for anyone to escape. You can't read anymore. The pain in your stomach is unbearable. You jerk from your seat and stumble out into the hall, doubled over in agony. You can feel it pulsing in there, fighting its way out. It must have gotten in through the filthy mop water you were drinking. You didn't even know it, but your fate has been sealed for hours. You've been a dead man walking. The hum of pain builds in your ears and renders you almost deaf. All you can hear is the pattern of rain and distant thunder. You collapse against the glass, feeling the coolness of it against the skin of your face. And in that moment, you see the water droplets on the window pane reverse direction. They're slithering up the glass towards your face in defiance of gravity. Then you realize it's all over. And not just for you. SCP-3280 has escaped. It's out there, and it's going to drown the entire world. As you collapse to your knees and prepare to be torn apart from the inside, your final thought is that at least you won't be alive to see it. Qinghai Lake. The largest lake in China is one of the most secure locations the SCP Foundation has ever taken control of. All available military assets have been gathered at the site, including 3 of the most elite Mobile Task Force units with experimental weaponry. SCP-4290 must not be allowed to open, and the site has been surrounded by nuclear mines and targeted with the Dagaz Break orbital strike system. The perimeter cannot be breached, even if it means the complete annihilation of the entire area. This is considered to be an acceptable loss for the Foundation, since the destruction that would be caused by taking such an extreme measure is far from the worst-case scenario when it comes to SCP-4290. That's because the entity contained within SCP-4290's site has the potential to create a true end-of-the-world scenario. The Foundation, of course, is no stranger to such situations, and even has a set of designations for the various types of apocalypses, like CK-class restructuring scenarios and ZK-class end-of-reality scenarios. And since dealing with the end of the world is nothing new for the Foundation, certain precautions have been taken at the 4290 site. If containment measures fail, selected Foundation personnel and civilians will be taken into nearby emergency shelters that will hopefully survive the chaos that would occur following a breach. And the Foundation assumed that there was a good chance this plan would have to be used at some point, since at the time these precautions were put in place, it was impossible to know the chance of successful long-term containment. But just what is the entity that is held within the site of SCP-4290 that is capable of causing so much death and destruction on a major scale? They call it simply the Child. No one has ever seen the Child. No one knows what the entity is. That's because even setting aside all the Foundation's security, the site itself is still deeply protected. Literally. Over 100 feet below the surface of Qinghai Lake, a stunning collection of relics can be found. The site is thaumaturgically sealed with 8 massive metal totems made of beryllium and bronze that resemble armed warriors. The statues are inscribed with runes and arranged in a pattern designed to banish the entity kept there and keep the seal on its prison closed. Archaeological evidence indicates that the site has been there for a very long time, and it is still active, with the center of the site periodically emitting bursts of red light, but lately the bursts have suddenly started getting brighter. You may be wondering how we know so much about SCP-4290, and that it's a site designed to keep something sealed if it's been deep in a lake quietly doing its job. The SCP Foundation has access to unusual sources, including SCP-1726, and it's from there that we learned the little we know about SCP-4290. SCP-1726 is a library in China that appears to only be 1 floor from the outside, but on the inside covers over 14 square kilometers in area. It's full of a seemingly limitless amount of texts, many of which describe ancient and lost civilizations, along with some clues as to what led to the fall of these cultures. One text reveals the presence of a terrible and apparently unstoppable enemy. It was called the Child, but it was anything but innocent. When these texts were translated, what Foundation researchers discovered terrified them. They described the emergence of a beast with 10 terrible mouths and 20 arms stretched wide. It was attacked by an army of warriors, but they were quickly overwhelmed by what was described as torrents of darkness and dead geometries. They were killed brutally, and the Child used its skeletal fingers to unleash a torrent of flame. Every soul in the vicinity was consumed. Wax rained from the sky, and the Child devoured everything around it for 10 days, as the whole world trembled. But then something sealed the Child away in its prison, which is now covered by the waters of Qinghai Lake. Soon, ominous signs began to appear that the Child would awaken again, though. One day, televisions in the nearby area all suddenly stopped playing their regular programming and began to show images of SCP-4290, with a mysterious voice coming on over the images saying, "Repair the Child's locks." This became more and more frequent, and the tone of the voice became more worried, eventually saying, "There is little time left." Further investigations of the location revealed the location of the mysterious mechanism that kept the chamber sealed, which was designated as SCP-4290 lock. But how do you repair a device that is eons old? And should you even be fixing it when the one telling you to do so is a mysterious disembodied voice that only appears on pirated television broadcasts? The Foundation scrambled to find any information they could, and they were able to find clues about the history of SCP-4290 referenced in other texts. Lost civilizations like the Xia Dynasty, the Erkshans, and the ancient Orthonians had apparently strengthened the seals during their own reigns. but the most significant findings indicated a connection to one of the most terrifying entities the SCP Foundation had ever contained, and one of the most unpredictable, the Davit Empire. This mysterious warlike civilization has only been known through one source, SCP-140, a single hard copy book titled A Chronicle of Devas. This is a strange, anomalous book that is written in blood and is able to add more pages spontaneously to itself whenever it comes in contact with any fluid that can be used for writing, but seems to especially prefer human blood. It recounts the history of this civilization and their many brutal conquests. While there was no proof of the Devas before the book was found, evidence paralleling the events written in the book is now being found in archaeological digs. More dangerously, as more pages appear in the book, the events of the Deva Empire are moving closer to present day, with them currently appearing in the book as having existed until 270 CE. The Devas were a bloodthirsty, brutal race of warriors, but there was one thing even they were afraid of: the child. The Devas had performed the last successful ritual of sacrifice needed to strengthen the lock not long before their currently described destruction, and the book contained enough detail to recreate the ritual. But SCP researchers would find that performing it would not be for the faint of heart. The ritual required 3 human cadavers, not a problem for an organization that's normal day-to-day operation results in the loss of multiple lives, and the live heart of an angel. The description of the ritual said that the materials would be presented, new runes should be carved into the totems. The items would then vanish when the ritual was completed, and the lock would somehow be renewed by this. It wasn't much to go on, but time was running out. The Foundation's Department of Occult Containment quickly sprang into action, assembling the materials and placing them in the correct formation. While it was not safe to descend that deep underwater to perform the ritual manually, technology could fill the role. A fleet of remotely operated submersibles equipped with carving material would carry the materials and perform the ritual without any human hands needed. One of the red bursts occurred midway through the ritual, causing radiation damage to the vehicles. Runes that have been carved in the past were also damaged, and the ritual was interrupted. While it seemed like it might have been enough to activate the site, it wasn't perfect. And when the ritual was complete, one of the 3 cadavers and half of the angel heart were still present at the site. Had it been enough to satisfy the ritual and reseal the lock, there was nothing to do but wait and see. They wouldn't have to wait long for their answer, as the mysterious voice once again took over the televisions in the area. This time, its message was less friendly. The sacrifice did not reach the 10 maws. Brace. The child apparently was not satisfied, and the lock was not sealed. Everyone feared it was too late to prevent what was coming, and panic was starting to spread among the ranks. One day, several personnel stationed at the Qinghai Lake site broke protocol and fled. None of them were ever found, but one fugitive staff member, an Agent Zenobia Marinos, left behind a note though. It read, "Do we think we can actually stop this? No civilization before us wanted to fight the child. None of them. The sacrifices won't work anymore. It refuses to consume them. They aren't enough to satiate it. Once the seal breaks, we'll have a world of molten darkness and the child will be all that's left. Eating, drinking, you're fools for staying." Agent Marinos was apparently so scared that she had fled through a portal to an extra-dimensional space in order to escape. There would be no point in trying to track her, even if she was still alive. But in our own dimension, time was running out. Foundation seismologists were brought to the site and stationed outside, and began monitoring the high-energy pulses coming from behind the lock. The energy was reportedly strong enough to alter dimensions, and the pulsing red light now covered the entire ceiling site, growing stronger and stronger as the totems started degrading at an alarming rate. The Foundation stood on guard for whatever was about to emerge, but no one knew if they had any chance against whatever it was. On August 18th, the totems fully disintegrated. Some of the Foundation's best military forces gathered on the shores of the lake and waited. 10 minutes later, something massive emerged phase out of the lock and onto the seabed, and didn't move. The assembled Foundation forces were confused and continued to observe the creature, and after no activity was seen after 3 hours, the authorization was given for submersibles and a small exploratory team to proceed down to the seabed for an up-close investigation. There, down on the floor of the lake, was the child. It was as terrifying as described,
with a countless mouths and arms and huge in size, over 40 meters long. The signs of previous rituals were everywhere, with angel hearts and human corpses littered around, some in the creature's mouth, but none of them had been eaten. The ritual had apparently been performed many times, but to no actual purpose. The massive being was scanned many times, but no sign of psychic energy, radiation, or other life signs were detected. The child was dead, and it had apparently been so for a very, very long time. Once the area had been cleared, teams were brought in to investigate the body in person and perform an autopsy on site. No explanation of what exactly this creature had been or what its origins were has ever been discovered, but they did get answers for when it died. The time of death was roughly 9,000 years ago, not long after its initial sealing. The cause of death was discovered too. The child destroyer of worlds and scourge of countless civilizations had died from malnutrition. Whatever this thing had been, it had been sealed away and had died from hunger not long after. One civilization after another had continued to perform the rituals to keep it sealed, never aware that it was no longer a threat. With this new discovery, SCP-6290 was reclassified as neutralized, but the child taught us all a valuable lesson about being prepared for potential world-ending scenarios. And the Foundation continues to stand on alert for any more entities from the distant past that may pose a threat today. Because who knows what else is sealed away at the bottom of a lake, abandoned mine, or in the ocean's deepest trenches. There might just be another existential threat to humanity that's just waiting for a chance to emerge and help us all if it remembered to pack a lunch. A pickaxe shatters the rocky wall of a mine shaft hundreds of feet below the earth. It's 1871, in a place that will later be known as Columbia County, Pennsylvania. Men performing back-breaking labor, their hands and faces blackened with dirt, all working in pursuit of that immensely valuable rock, coal. It's the fuel for the booming industrial revolution, and much like how dragons were said to guard gold, this more modern treasure pointed to an even more terrifying monster. A monster that the SCP Foundation would someday come to know as SCP-1179. But these unfortunate and underpaid miners had no idea what they were about to discover. One of the men working there that day, Rob O'Dwyer, was hammering away at the wall in front of him when he heard something strange. Was that an echo behind the rocks? This could mean only one thing. The rocks in front of them were hollow. There had to be some kind of space hiding behind them. O'Dwyer struck again and again at the rocks in front of him until the barrier finally tumbled away. He and the other miners suddenly felt a gust of cool, ancient air from the vast and darkened cavern in front of them sweep through the mine. They felt like they were standing on the edge of something truly otherworldly. As they lifted their safety lamps high and crept carefully into the dark, it dawned on them that they were likely the first human beings to ever set foot here. But that didn't mean something non-human hadn't gotten there first. O'Dwyer's lamp soon found something in the dark. A huge figure curled into a crouching position, hiding its face. It was made from stone, like an enormous yet incredibly detailed statue of something almost human, but not quite. The petrified thing had two great horns on either side of its head, twisting into spirals like that of a huge ram. Word of the giant frozen monster hidden in the bottom of the mine soon made its way back to the foreman, and then back to the mine's owner, one Sean O'Malley. If it were anyone else, perhaps this news would have been taken to the press immediately, and the Foundation would have taken control of the situation just as quickly. But Mr. O'Malley was no ordinary mining magnate. He was a member of the Molly Maguires, an Irish-American secret society whose members were predominantly coal miners in Pennsylvania. Sean and the other Molly Maguires dubbed this anomaly the Sleeping Stone Giant, and conspired to keep it a secret between them, as secret societies have a habit of doing. Though the Molly Maguires were disbanded less than a decade later, they were all sworn to secrecy on the Giant's resting place. Until, of course, a descendant of Sean O'Malley, his grandson Ian O'Malley, was chosen as a prospective agent of the SCP Foundation. The Foundation doesn't just let anyone join their ranks. They perform an extensive background check on all prospective agents, both to find out that they're capable of rising to the challenges of the job, and also to detect any affiliation to enemy groups of interest.
It was during this background check that O'Malley's subterranean family secret was discovered, and the land above the old mine shaft was bought up by a front company owned by the Foundation. The sleeping stone giant was finally in capable hands, and in keeping with standard procedure, a research site was built above the giant to gather data and keep an eye on things. At the time, the anomaly was considered extremely low risk. Its containment file read, SCP-1179 is apparently dormant, encased in the bedrock under research site. Apart from simple monitoring and standard research safety protocols, no additional containment is deemed necessary at this time. But of course, those simple containment procedures would soon need updating. In 1962, the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania had a trash problem. There were 8 illegal trash dumping sites across the town, and to combat this issue, the town council opened up a huge landfill in an abandoned mine shaft. You'd think this would be enough for the moderately sized town, but humans have a tendency to produce a lot of trash, and they soon filled up the new landfill too. In order to address the issue, the town decided to do a controlled burn of some of the garbage. It should have been simple enough. But those who lit this garbage fire didn't follow proper safety procedures and ended up accidentally igniting a seam of anthracite coal. This was like lighting the fuse to the world's largest stick of dynamite, and fire soon coursed through the long abandoned mine tunnels. When the fireball finally reached the sleeping stone giant in its dark pit, the beast woke up. In that instant, an otherwise uneventful day quickly became a brutal bloodbath. Researchers walking through the base felt a monstrous rumbling beneath them. Heat sensors were burning up and seismic readings were off the scale. Something was climbing up towards them. Suddenly, an impossibly large sword speared its way out of the floor, killing everyone around it with an immense blast of heat. The newly awakened monster went on an underground rampage, almost completely destroying the research base and killing nearly everyone inside, before retreating into the honeycomb of coal mines and caverns in the area, igniting even more anthracite coal fires. The Foundation needed to step in before things really got out of control. At present, the Foundation couldn't properly administer standard area construction protocols for Keter-class SCPs, so they instead designated the mines, caverns, and surrounding countryside as Area 179, and dispatched mobile task forces to try and contain the beast rampaging in the Centralia mines. But much like the fire that started this whole mess, the beast proved much harder to control than initially imagined. All 5 of the expeditionary teams sent to apprehend the monster failed, and many team members were slaughtered in the process. From the terrifying accounts of the survivors, we have a vague idea of the nature of the beast below. No pictures of the creature exist, and exact descriptions on the beast can vary. Whether this is because the beast frequently shapeshifts or because it has some kind of cognito-hazardous effects on those who view it is unclear. The most frequently reported characteristics of the creature are its immense height and the extreme heat that its body exudes. Many report that the creature's body seemed to be formed of a mix of hardened lava, pure fire, and burning smoke. The beast measures over 30 meters from head to toe, with shoulders over 8 meters wide. It's commonly said to have 2 huge ram-like horns and a weathered, bearded face. The beast has been compared by some to the Norse mythological figure Surtur, the giant guarding the frontier of the Norse fire realm of Muspel. However, the actual age of the creature seems to predate these legends by a considerable margin. Dating of the stratum encasing SCP-1179 indicates it dates to the Mississippian subperiod of the Carboniferous period, approximately 359.2 to 318.1 million years ago. This age is consistent with the geological age of this region, so it may have literally come with the territory. Less common descriptions of the beast claim that it has huge wings, eyes made of hellfire, and fangs as long as a man's arm. Some say that the beast has neither horns nor fangs, and its face is encircled by flames which reach down into a long beard of fire. And like a certain creature known as the Balrog that Lord of the Rings fans will be very familiar with, this beast comes with weapons. In one hand, the beast wields a giant burning sword around 5 meters in length. In the other, it wields a huge multi-tailed whip made out of fire. It's incredibly proficient with these weapons too, and has a serious strategic advantage in its underground environment.
Foundation researchers have determined that some of the wounds the beast gained from its first confrontation haven't fully healed, implying the beast could, in theory, be destroyed with enough firepower. However, given that the beast has killed almost everyone who faced it, and its mere presence can start almost uncontrollable fires, direct engagement would only be used as a last resort. Even the creature's breath can be extremely dangerous. Chemical analysis of air samples taken from SCP-1179's breath have shown exceptionally high concentrations of carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide. The very presence of this creature creates a real and active danger to everyone around it. And the beast's presence was beginning to have seriously negative effects on the people up above. By the 1970s, the Foundation had given up on sending mobile task forces into the caverns, and instead began to focus on depopulating the town of Centralia to prevent further fatalities from the presence of SCP-1179. The subterranean activities of the creature were causing collapses in some areas, and noxious fumes were beginning to rise up from cracks in the ground. As the constant raging fires burned beneath the earth, they were causing everything above to slowly melt or bake. A Foundation geologist determined that the fires created by the beast would likely remain active for 250 years, and any attempts to put out the fires or contain the beast would ultimately be futile. This led to the formation of Project Tartarus, a concerted effort to cover up SCP-1179 and fully evacuate the citizens of Centralia. They pushed the narrative that the mine fires, while deadly, were merely the result of the failed garbage burning plan, and little by little the people of Centralia began to move away. By 1984, the United States government finally caved to secret lobbying from the Foundation and allocated funds in excess of $42 million to relocate the remaining civilian residents from the area. Any legal complaints from Centralia residents were quietly crushed by the Foundation, and efforts to remove pretty much all residents from the area were successful. This allowed the Foundation to finally cast a wider net and administer Kettier-class containment protocols around the 2-kilometer underground zone where SCP-1179 resides. The Foundation has continued studies on the beast from below in the decades since, with some scientists even suggesting it could be used to produce geothermal energy, but whether or not that would actually be feasible remains unknown. For now, SCP-1179 seems content to stay within its zone, and hopefully it stays that way. But as we're forced to dig deeper and deeper for the remaining precious metals here on Earth, there's no telling what new dangers we might find lurking far below the ground. It was 1948 in Villa Blanca, Guatemala. As night fell, 2 young boys, Carlos and Miguel, played a game of soccer in the street. It was a quiet town full of humble, hard-working people, and they were about to come face to face with a monster. Typically, when something like this happened, you'd know exactly who to call: the SCP Foundation. Problem is, while these days we can generally depend on the hard-working agents and researchers of the Foundation to save us from any anomalous, supernatural threats with their tactics, expertise, and equipment, it wasn't always this way. There was a time before the SCP Foundation became the titan of anomaly combating prowess it is today, and it's that time that we're focusing on today. It all comes back to a strange and violent creature wandering the darkened streets of Guatemala, or as Dr. Charles Ogden Gears proposed we call it, SCP-001, the prototype. SCP-001 is a topic that we've covered in a number of videos, but even then we can never quite capture the full scope of this wily designation. What is SCP-001 is probably one of the most loaded questions you can possibly ask a member of the SCP Foundation, and it may be your last, as the majority of the files under the SCP-001 umbrella are highly classified for pretty much everyone under Level 5 clearance. 001 covers a large number of potentially anomalous items, entities, and concepts, from the dreaded Scarlet King to the awe-inspiring Gate Guardian, to the very SCP Foundation itself, through the eyes of the charmingly incompetent Unusual Incidents Unit of the FBI. Perhaps they're all real, perhaps only one of them is, and the rest are in there as a smokescreen. Perhaps they're all fake, red herrings laid down to hide the trail to something even more secretive and fantastic. All we know is that 001 seemed to be gathered around a collection of loose themes: the beginnings of the Foundation, events or entities that could end the Foundation or even the world,
and key formative moments in the Foundation's history. Dr. Gear's proposal for SCP-001 lies firmly in the latter camp, and if you keep watching and listening closely, you'll see exactly why. Back to Carlos and Miguel, the pair of 11-year-olds playing football on the quiet back streets of Villa Blanca. They were kicking the ball back and forth when they heard a strange screeching noise in the distance. At first they thought it was some kind of injured bird, squawking desperately for help. Being good kids, they didn't waste a second running into the action, heading further into the outskirts of town. However, the creature they encountered on that rural road was certainly no bird. When they first saw it hunched over a few meters in front of them, they thought it must have been a horribly injured man. He was deadly thin, with gray-brown skin that looked either bruised or burned. It was twitching and weeping, its chest heaving in heavy labored pants. Its limbs were jerking wildly, as though the creature was being electrocuted. "Hey mister, are you okay?" Carlos called out in Spanish. In that moment, what they had wrongly thought was a man just froze up, finally registering their presence. Immediately, the two boys knew something was wrong, as the creature slowly rose to its full height, well over 6 feet, towering over the two of them, even at a distance. They noticed something was wrong with its limbs. They were too long, well out of proportion with its human-sized torso. It didn't have hands and feet, at least not in the way that humans do. Instead, its slender ankles terminated in long black spikes, and its wrists each split off into 3 equally black claws. But worst of all was its face, if you could even call what that monster had a face. Its head was split in the middle by a huge mouth. At first, its gnarly lips were pursed, but they soon slid open with a low, rumbling roar. The boys could feel their knees shaking as they saw the monster's mouthful of long, rotten fangs. Something started sliding up the dark passage of the monster's throat. A translucent, milky blue sphere. Was that thing an eye? It made the two boys feel sick to even look at it. That's when the eye started to glow, and the space around the monster began to shimmer slightly, like some kind of terrible sorcery. As the two boys felt a strange force pulling at them, trying to tug them into the creature's embrace, they were suddenly jogged from their frightened paralysis and decided to finally make a run for it. There was no doubt about what had just happened. They'd encountered a demon in the flesh, intent on taking their souls straight to hell. When the two of them told their parents, they were met at first with disbelief. Two young boys saw something that frightened them in the dark, perhaps an animal, if anything at all, and they'd let their imaginations run wild. It was typical of children. However, things didn't seem quite so simple when more sightings started popping up. People all across the town of Villa Blanca started seeing this monster, all with matching descriptions. A huge, emaciated beast with a mouth for a face, its glowing blue eye nested inside. The natural excuses circulated at first. Perhaps the creature was a local prankster in a costume. This would be comforting to believe, but how many pranksters in costumes can completely disappear before your very eyes? The monster's eye would glow, and just like that, it would simply vanish. As fear and paranoia began spreading through the town, people suggested that perhaps it was a case of mass hysteria, fear and panic taking over rationality. But by this point, things had gotten worse. Carlos and Miguel, the two boys who'd first discovered the demon on the back road, had become sick. They were experiencing severe nausea, vomiting, headaches, and diarrhea. Their bodies weakened. Lesions began developing on their skin. As their conditions deteriorated, and it seemed as though nobody was capable of treating them, a rumor spread that the monster was somehow inducing this sickness. The town doctor didn't have the expertise to diagnose it, but the boys were suffering from acute radiation sickness, and they wouldn't be the only ones. Many of the people who'd reported sightings and close encounters with the monster started coming down with severe radiation sickness. To the townspeople, it just seemed to be a demon spreading some invisible plague among them, but the horrors wouldn't stop there. It seemed that this demon also liked to take a more direct approach to harming the townsfolk, because not long after the sickness broke out, people started disappearing. There were never any bodies. The most that would ever be found were tattered items of clothing left at the site of the disappearances, or blood smeared across the walls or ground. Before they knew it, 7 of their people were gone. It seemed that for all intents and purposes, God had abandoned them. They were playthings of the demon now. Thankfully for the townsfolk who weren't yet irradiated or vanished, an organization was forming, one that might be their only chance at salvation. Someday in the future, it would become known as the SCP Foundation, but it had a lot to learn before it got there. You see, the reason that this iteration of SCP-001 is known as the prototype is that, if Dr. Gears is to be believed, it may be the first anomalous entity that they ever truly faced. So naturally, getting the creature captured and contained didn't go quite as smoothly as most of their modern jobs, despite the comparative simplicity of this old threat. General Machoy, an ex-military operator that became part of what we'll once again call the precursors to the Foundation, led a research and recovery team into Villa Blanca to hunt down and retrieve the beast that had been causing all this misery and death among the townsfolk. However, this proved to be easier said than done. While its bestial appearance might fool people into thinking the monster was just a mindless animal, later writings on the creature would describe it as both incredibly cunning and terrifyingly fast. When a group of armed personnel first tried to engage the creature directly, they had no idea that they were walking right into the middle of a bloodbath. They believed they had it surrounded on another rural back road, advancing with assault rifles, when the creature flipped out and started killing them. The prototype proved to have frightening offensive capabilities. Its 3 dark claws easily carved through the armor of the soldiers trying desperately to contain it. The creature moved so fast that none of them could reliably draw a bead on it, and if any of them could, it was holding their severed head before they had a chance to squeeze the trigger. But death by the creature's claws was one of the more pleasant ways it could kill its victims. At one point during an engagement with precursor troops, it opened its mouth and unveiled its glowing blue eye. At this point, one of the soldiers screamed and suddenly seemed to be sucked inside of himself, completely disappearing. The prototype's blue eye glowed again, and it once again just teleported away from the scene. A number of soldiers who survived this altercation later needed to be treated for acute radiation sickness. Researchers eventually managed to figure out what was actually happening with the creature. It had the ability to manifest micro-singularities, tiny black holes that it used to both teleport from place to place and defend itself from attacks when necessary. These singularities wouldn't stick around for long, a few seconds at most, but they had the terrifying side effect of putting out massive amounts of radiation. This is why it was making so much of the town and the recovery team sick via mere proximity. Thankfully, in finding out the creature's strength, they also managed to find out its weaknesses. Its powers were dampened by high humidity, bright lights, and especially intense strobing lights. It was through the use of these lights that the creature was finally captured and brought into ADRX-19, a complex that would later become Site-19 for containment. There, its containment procedures were devised by one of the burgeoning organization's top minds, Dr. Herman Ketter. However, Dr. Ketter would sadly never actually live to see the duration of the prototype's containment at ADRX-19. He was tragically killed by the monster, though his name would live on as the designation for anomalies that were particularly difficult to contain. It was thanks to him that his coworkers realized lead-lined walls, a reinforced steel door, a 100% humidity environment, and the frequent application of high-intensity strobe lights were the best way to keep the prototype locked up for good. To this day, this iteration of SCP-001 is a fascinating reminder that the SCP Foundation wasn't always the juggernaut it is today. There was once a time where they had as little idea of what they were doing as the rest of us. There's no better representation of this than the file itself. It was an era before object classes and conventional designation numbers. The file is written in a sketchy, disorganized manner and arranged into item designation number, warning, description of item, detail of current containment, report, and addendum. As with any experience in life, it's always worth asking, what can we learn from the SCP Foundation's experience with its possible first anomaly, a monster that seems almost nostalgically quaint by today's standards? Perhaps the greatest message is that everything is a work in progress. It was only by determination and persistence that the Foundation could go from an organization challenged by a monster like the Prototype to going toe-to-toe with real heavy hitters like the Scarlet King. How very inspirational.
We have always been afraid of the dark. Ancient ancestors of mankind built fires to chase the shadows away, to keep the thick, black mystery of night from encroaching on their fragile little homes. with all of the teeth and claws it hid within its depths. From the time we were small children, we knew to be nervous when the lights went out. We beg our parents to leave the hall light on, or plug in a nightlight, praying that a tiny sliver of illumination will protect us from the monsters we just know are salivating beneath the bed, scratching against the closet door, waiting for us to close our eyes. We pull the blankets tight over our heads, heating the air with our panicked breaths, and reminding ourselves that the shadow in the corner of the room was just a rocking chair or a coat rack. We pretend it's the truth. But there's a reason we fear the darkness as much as we do. It's inherent. It's a memory passed down from generation to generation, ever since we first learned how to scream. As adults, we try to tell ourselves we've outgrown those childish fears and night terrors. We know better now, but you still run up the darkened staircase as if something's chasing you, and your heart jumps into your throat when you hear a sound after midnight. Call it El Cucuy, the Clud, the Boogeyman, or 1,000 other names. We all know there is something lurking in the dark, and it knows us, too. D-Class 080-1 was pulled from his cell one afternoon and brought to a containment chamber. He knew the drill by now. They would send him in and he would encounter something bizarre, horrible, and potentially deadly. Maybe he would emerge traumatized. Maybe he would lose a limb. Or maybe he would never come back out at all. A security guard opened the door and instructed him to enter. It wasn't an ideal situation, but he really didn't have much of a choice. And so, he walked inside. Dr. Smith called to him from outside the room, asking him what he could see inside. It was pitch black, and he couldn't see a thing, and he told the doctor as much. But then, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. A chill rippled down his spine. He had the distinct feeling that something was looking right at him, watching, waiting. "Did you just let something in here?" he asked. It feels like something's watching me." "No, D080-1, Dr. Smith responded. "We did not let anything into the room." The man's hands were shaking, and he could feel sweat beading on his forehead. That couldn't be true. He wasn't alone in there. There, in the corner, there was a black mass, large and somehow even darker than the rest of the room. He could feel its eyes on his, boring into him. His heart thudded in his chest, and he felt like he might be sick. He tried to take a step back, but his ankle folded under him and he collapsed onto the floor. "What do you see?" Dr. Smith asked. The man struggled to find the words. The giant blackness, like someone's just standing in the corner. Oh God, it's looking right at me, let me out!" He climbed to his feet and he felt his way along the wall until he reached the door and began to pound against it with his fists. The doctor refused to let him out until he described the being's appearance. It looks like a figure hunched in the corner." "Is it human?" Dr. Smith asked. Though he knew it was too dark for the doctor to see, he shook his head. No, it's too big to be a human. It's still looking at me, Doc, still staring." Though he should have had adrenaline pumping through his body, he felt suddenly sleepy, almost unable to keep his eyes open. "Move closer to it," Dr. Smith ordered. The D-Class obeyed, though he swayed on his feet as he walked. "Its eyes look like paper, just staring at me. It wants me to do something." At this point, he fell to the ground again, suddenly silent. Dr. Smith called out to him again and again, but the man did not respond. When the research team opened the containment chamber several minutes later, D080-1 was gone. He was lost to the thing that waits for us in the dark. He was lost to SCP-080. This was the first in a series of tests that a Foundation research team, headed by Dr. Smith, performed in order to better understand this shadowy figure and determine whether or not it has a physical body of any kind. When the results were determined to be unsatisfactory, another experiment was conducted. A woman referred to as D080-2 was selected and sent into the room. This time they would attempt to have the D-Class touch the entity. Upon entering the chamber, D080-2 remarked on how dark it was and how difficult it was to see anything inside. After several minutes, however, she noticed something standing in the room. When prompted, the only descriptor she could give was that the entity had 2 eyes. Dr. Smith asked her to approach the entity and report any changes. As she got closer, she became increasingly drowsy and exhausted. When she reached out to touch SCP-080, she went quiet and did not respond to any additional questions. She was found asleep in the corner of the containment room and was immediately examined by medical staff. No adverse physical effects were found, and an interview was conducted to determine if there was any residual psychological impact. In her interview, D080-2 was noticeably distant. Her expression and tone of voice both described as spaced out. When asked about her encounter with the entity, she became increasingly upset and began to hyperventilate. She screamed, "It just stared and stared, not moving, but I felt something. I was on the floor and they were all over me. They're here. No, they're trying to take me away back to that thing. I won't go back. You can't make me go back in there." At this point, she lunged across the table and attempted to attack Dr. Smith. She was removed from the interview room and later terminated. A third experiment was conducted using a man referred to as D080-3. In order to counteract the entity's tranquilizing effects, he was given a powerful amphetamine at a dose that would keep a person under ordinary circumstances awake for at least 36 hours. When he entered the room like all the others, D080-3 saw a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the room. He was told to stand still and watch the figure, and report anything unusual that he might notice. After 10 minutes, the subject became frightened and demanded to be let out of the room. He pounded on the door and attempted to wedge it open. When he failed to open the door, he lunged at SCP-080 and attempted to hit it with his fists. He promptly slumped on the floor and went silent. His dead body was found in the room after the experiment, and an autopsy determined the cause of death to be a severe heart attack. The researchers who entered to retrieve the body felt unsettled as they did so, reporting a feeling that SCP-080 was looking directly at them the entire time. Following the conclusion of these experiments, the research team was able to draw several conclusions about SCP-080. It causes debilitating drowsiness in anyone who enters its containment chamber. After 30 minutes of exposure, anyone who is observing the entity will involuntarily fall into REM sleep. If there is any light in the room brighter than a standard children's nightlight, the entity will disappear. This should be treated as a containment breach if and when this occurs. After conducting their experiments, Dr. Smith and his research team began to experience highly upsetting dreams. While many of the staff began requesting appointments with the medical team, Dr. Smith refused to discuss the nature of his dreams with any on-site psychologists, insisting that he wasn't going to let some silly nightmares get the better of him. As the weeks wore on, however, he became increasingly withdrawn. His colleagues noted dark circles under his eyes and noticed his near-constant consumption of coffee that far surpassed anything they had seen from him before. He seemed as if he was terrified of falling asleep. One day, the exhaustion caught up to him, and he fell asleep at his desk. Everyone in the building heard his screams, and when a security guard eventually shook him awake, his throat was so raw from crying out in terror that he was coughing up globs of blood. Dr. Smith begged to be given an amnestic to help him forget what he had dreamed about, forget all his dreams, but his request was denied. He was placed on an indefinite leave of absence and sent home. 2 days later, the research team was given a somber report. Dr. Smith had leapt off a bridge. Following Dr. Smith's tragic demise, the rest of his staff were given notebooks and encouraged to keep dream journals during the course of their research in order to track the psychological impact of studying SCP-080. Additionally, they were required to turn these journals in to site psychologists for review, particularly if the dreams became especially disturbing or violent. The following are excerpts from some of these dream journals. Research Assistant Megan Vaughn. Last night I dreamt I was lying in my bed. Not my bed now in my apartment, but my childhood bed with the baby pink sheets and the quilt my grandmother made. It felt so real, every detail. My dollhouse in the corner, my big teddy bear, my tea set, and my closet. I was lying on my side with my head facing my closet. I used to be so scared of that closet. Every night I would sob until my dad checked it for monsters. I couldn't go to sleep until he did.
but in my dream I knew he hadn't checked, and I just knew there was something in there waiting for me to close my eyes, so I didn't. I just stared at that closet door and I waited for it to open. I started hearing this scraping noise, like dragging something sharp across a wooden surface, over and over and over again. But the door didn't budge, no matter how long I stared at it. All the while the noise just kept going. Scrape, scrape, and the sound of soft, raspy breathing, but the closet stayed shut. Eventually I rolled onto my back and there it was, on my ceiling, hanging over me with its upside-down head and round, open mouth. An old woman with long, stringy hair and fingernails as long as my arms. She was scratching on the ceiling and waiting for me to look. I couldn't move. I could just stare up at her as she took two of those long, long fingernails and slowly inched them towards my eyes. And then I woke up. I'm scared if I go back to sleep, she'll pick up right where she left off. Dr. Owen Coley. I'm swimming in my family's pond and it's a beautiful sunny day outside. I can feel the sun's heat on my skin and the crisp cold water cooling it every time I dip under the surface. I decide to swim down towards the bottom and dive for rocks, and when I come back up, suddenly it's dark. It's the middle of the night and the water doesn't look so clear anymore. I can't see the bottom. I can't see anything around me at all, and I feel something slither against my leg. I kick it away, but I just feel something else on my other side, slimy and quick. I can't see it, but I can feel that it's much bigger than me. So I start swimming towards the edge, trying to get out before something worse happens. And I feel this sharp pain, like 100 needles stabbing into my back. And it hurts so bad I see red, but I keep swimming. I reach the edge and I try to pull myself out, but I can't. There's something on me. It's so heavy I can't get out. I look over my shoulder and I can now make it out. It's the biggest leech I've ever seen, and it's latched onto me. I can see it pulsing, swallowing. It's draining me. I feel so weak all of a sudden, dizzy, and I look down at my hands and they're shriveling up right there, my fingers pruning as I feel the blood being pulled out of me. My vision blurs up and my head tips back and I'm sinking down into the water as the leech keeps sucking. Pulls down into the muck at the bottom and everything just goes dark.
Researcher Kathy Levine.
Okay, in my dream I was in my old house back when I lived out in the woods. No cell reception and no neighbors. I was in the shower washing my hair, I think. It's so hard to remember the details. I don't remember the details of dreams very well, but I'll do my best. This part I do remember. I heard this sound like footsteps coming from the floor above me. That quiet thudding sound coming down through the ceiling. I turned off the water to listen better, and there it was again. Definitely footsteps. Someone was in my house. I threw on my clothes and I slowly snuck out of the bathroom and I made my way to the front door. I don't know why, I just knew I needed to get out of there. Just when I opened it, I heard the footsteps behind me and I turned around and there was this man there. Huge, like 7 feet tall, massive tangled beard, wild eyes, and holding an axe. We stared at each other for a long time and he just smiled, like he was so sure he was going to kill me and have a lovely time doing it. I ran out of the house and into the woods and I could hear him coming after me. Branches hit me in the face and cut up my arms as I ran, and I just knew I had to get away. But then I started to get that feeling you get when you run in dreams, like your legs don't work, like you're pushing through water. I was running as fast as I could, but I wasn't going forward at all. And then I felt a hand grabbing my hair, yanking my head back, and the blade of the axe slicing across my cheek. He whispered in my ear, and his breath smelled like rotting flesh. And I'll never forget this next part. He said,
"We're not done playing yet. I'm gonna take you apart in tiny pieces and save your head for last."
Dr. Robert Gray.
I was sitting on the couch next to my wife. We were watching television. I turned to ask her a question and she was staring at me with these dilated pupils so big her eyes looked all black. And then she opened her mouth to speak to me, I thought. But it got wider and wider and had no teeth, just this expanding tunnel of pink flesh that started to suck me inside until my head disappeared into her mouth and I began to suffocate. I haven't been able to look my wife in the eye all day today.
Other dream journals were less detailed. Research assistant Matt Guerro simply wrote, "My dog ate me," while senior researcher Barbara Bradley wrote, "I was stuck inside my fish tank, and my fish were feeding me human flakes." No matter how frightening or absurd the dream details were,
All the staff reported experiencing feelings of intense stress and panic while having them, and after waking up. SCP-080 is contained in a 4-meter by 4-meter room with a small antechamber on the south wall, providing researchers with access to the space. On the other side of the north wall, there is an observation room where researchers can view the containment room through a window. The window is outfitted with thin blackout curtains, which release when the observation room door has fully closed. No one may attempt to remove SCP-080 from its containment at any time under any circumstances. No light sources may be brought into the room, and no more than one 7-watt incandescent light bulb may be lit inside. Additionally, no objects may be brought into the room that can be used to hide SCP-080 in any way. Anyone who breaks these rules will be swiftly and strictly disciplined and may be subject to termination. Following Incident 080-1, the containment measures have been re-evaluated, and additional measures have been proposed. During this incident, 2 senior researchers entered the observation room and released the blackout curtains. Certain that this was a safe way to observe SCP-080 without being influenced by its adverse effects, the 2 remained in the room for 40 minutes. At this point, the 2 fell asleep. It is unknown what exactly happened after this. However, after this incident, all staff suffering from anomalous nightmares reported having their first restful night's sleep since the research had begun. It was as if the entity's appetite had been temporarily sated, and it had released the rest of the team from its influence. In light of Incident 080-1, a member of the research team suggested that a D-Class be left in SCP-080's room once a month in order to feed it, and protect the rest of the team from psychological harm. After some debate and opposition from the Ethics Committee, this proposal was approved by the O5 Council. Now the entity is kept on a regular feeding schedule, and the staff's dream journals have been relatively uneventful ever since. It turns out that sometimes the price for a good night's sleep is just a little bit of human sacrifice.
Who doesn't love a walk through a dark forest? The sight of branches set against the low moonlight looking like all manner of dark and twisted claws reaching out of the night to grab at you. Every step brings with it the snap of a broken twig that practically echoes around you. Whenever a breeze rustles the leaves on the trees, you feel like something might just be following you, moving through the forest towards you. It is easy to get lost in a forest at night, after all. That's why the children's song warns us that if you go down to the woods today, you'd better not go alone. The image of a forest in the darkness has inspired fear for generations, from fireside folktales telling of wolves and monsters lurking among the trees, to modern horror games about a tall, faceless man in a suit stalking you through the woods. And then, of course, there's SCP-060, otherwise known as the Infernal Occult Skeleton. Now, despite the name, SCP-060 is, in actual fact, a forest. Or at least, it's a forest to begin with. A picturesque grove of 17 tall white oak trees, spread out across 8 acres of land in rural northeast Minnesota. It almost looks like something out of a tourist brochure. A beautiful stretch of forest sitting under clear skies. Well, during the daytime, anyway. If you ever find yourself hiking through a corner of Minnesotan forest that isn't in any of the guidebooks, then tread carefully. You might just stumble upon the demolished ruins of a house that used to stand among the trees, out in seclusion. And a word of advice to you if you happen across this place: do not, under any circumstances, stop walking for a smoke break. Of course, thanks to the good folks at the SCP Foundation, you're unlikely to ever just wander your way into SCP-060. More likely, they'll administer you with amnestics, the Foundation's patented memory-altering drugs, and send you on your merry way, totally oblivious to the huge, hard-to-miss greenhouses containing SCP-060. Beyond those glass walls, you might have caught glimpses of Foundation personnel watering the trees, carefully tending to each SCP-060 specimen. Maybe you saw them gathering up leaves and pruning each tree individually, composting every part of dead plant matter instead of leaving the white oaks to grow freely. And perhaps you even noticed that not one member of personnel was carrying a lighter on their person, nor a taser, or so much as a small box of matches. Nothing that can start a fire.
Or rather, you would remember seeing all that if the amnestics hadn't already made you forget. But what's so special about these trees? Why would the SCP Foundation go to the extent of housing a collection of white oaks in greenhouses and meticulously oversee their growth? What is it about these particular specimens that make personnel so cautious about fire safety? And why on Earth is SCP-060 a collection of trees, referred to by the nickname the Infernal Occult Skeleton? Well, the answer to all those questions becomes pretty apparent the moment any of the SCP-060 oak trees catch fire, and something comes hurtling out of the forest. That something is known as SCP-060-Alpha. Standing at just over 2 meters tall, the entity takes the form of an adult human skeleton. Much more than just a spooky, scary collection of bones, SCP-060-Alpha is fully animate, capable of moving of its own accord, without the aid of muscles or a nervous system. Oh, and it also happens to be on fire. Move aside, Ghost Rider. SCP-060-Alpha is engulfed from skull to toe bones in bright white flames, burning at a temperature of approximately 1500 degrees Celsius, or almost 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. For reference, that's just shy of the melting point of iron, and hot enough to grant a human being a quick but agonizingly painful death. Granted, after a few seconds of that heat, your nerve endings would be scalded, so maybe you wouldn't feel that much pain. But 1500 Celsius is enough to burn the moisture right out of your skin, melt your eyeballs, and generally fry you to a crisp in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. Good thing SCP-060-Alpha isn't known for being highly aggressive and hostile. Oh, wait, it is? Not good. Upon manifestation, the burning skeleton will attempt to do as much damage as possible, and usually to whoever is closest. It can appear at any time, and after as little as 20 grams worth of one of the SCP-060 trees is burned. As if being actively hostile and burning hot enough to reshape metal wasn't bad enough, SCP-060-Alpha has also shown itself to be fiercely intelligent. The entity seems to retain knowledge whenever it manifests, and has gained a growing familiarity with the layout of the Foundation site that contains the SCP-060 Oaks. The Infernal Occult Skeleton's methods of attack tend to include throwing its entire body at flammable materials. However, it will avoid causing any damage to specimens of SCP-060. The skeletal entity can run at speeds up to 50 miles per hour. Now that's almost the same speed as a gazelle. Just picturing anything traveling towards you at that speed is horrifying, let alone something headed straight for you at gazelle levels of speed while also on fire. It is this combination of speed and heat that means SCP-060-Alpha poses such a threat to anyone close whenever it appears. If left unchecked, the entity could easily cause colossal and widespread forest fires and property damage. Interestingly, any areas that SCP-060-Alpha does burn with its flames will start to yield saplings of the SCP-060 Oaks around 6 weeks after the fire has stopped. The Foundation doesn't allow these saplings to grow to full size, and instead pulls them from the ground and disposes of them, composting the saplings to feed the other SCP-060 specimens. Luckily, the biggest strength of SCP-060-Alpha, its flames, also happens to be its greatest weakness. It is possible to fight the fires of the Infernal Occult Skeleton by dousing it with water, or any other materials capable of dousing flames, whether it's sand or foam from a fire extinguisher. Of course, this is a lot hotter and harder to put out than any ordinary smaller-scale fire, but despite being a difficult task, it is not impossible. About 500 liters of water should do the trick if you've got a big enough bucket nearby. After that, SCP-060-Alpha will be weakened, gradually collapsing and turning into dust. However, if another part of an SCP-060 tree is burned and the entity reappears, it is believed that this will be the same Infernal Occult Skeleton, rather than a new version of the bone-burning being. So we have a grove of oak trees that manifest a flaming skeleton if they are ever burned. Maybe that's not the weirdest thing you'd see in a Minnesotan forest. But wait, there's something else. Cast your mind back a few minutes and you'll remember that we mentioned some ruins. The remains of a demolished house that used to stand secluded among the SCP-060 white oak trees. Knowing that the Infernal Occult Skeleton can appear from the oaks might make it obvious what happened to this house, but there's still a story to be told here. The house's owner was a man by the name of Jonathan Corhill. Now, Jonathan was something of an odd man.
considered a bit of an eccentric to some. He preferred to spend his time in solitude, alone with his own thoughts for company, rather than mingling among the rest of the world. Even his own family noticed that Mr. Corhill was drifting away from them, becoming a more bitter, nihilistic person in his old age, and choosing isolation over human connection. Now, sure, loneliness doesn't hold much appeal to everyone, but sometimes there are people who just prefer being alone. That might be what drew Jonathan Corhill to his secluded little house in the forests of Minnesota, somewhere no one would bother him. For the most part, the rest of the Corhill family adjusted to their eccentric relative's behavior. Jonathan would have rarely accepted visitors to his house in the forest, but he still kept in contact with those who he'd been close with. Most notably, he'd regularly share phone calls with his brother, one Christopher Corhill. That is, until something seemed to change unexpectedly in the year 1996. On one of their calls, Jonathan outright told Christopher to never contact him again, severing any ties with any remaining family members and friends in the outside world. Jonathan cut everyone off, living within his own bubble where he could immerse himself in his unusual interests. According to Christopher, his brother had seemed otherwise normal up until a certain phone conversation, but Jonathan had become obsessed with the occult. Specifically, he had embroiled himself in the history of the Victorian era and certain supernatural practices that had been undertaken in that time period. Now, whether Christopher honored his brother's wish to sever ties is unknown. A mail carrier would visit Jonathan's home in the woods not long after their phone call. Maybe among the envelopes, this courier was delivering what could have been a letter from Christopher or other members of the Corhill family, begging their estranged relative to come back to the world. You see, even people who claim to prefer being on their own sometimes need human interaction. Talking to people and being in the presence of friends and family are hugely important factors in maintaining a positive state of mental health. But what happens when someone rejects that entirely and instead becomes lost in their obsessive study of the occult? Well, the mail carrier was the first to find out. Arriving at Jonathan Corhill's woodland house, the courier found the place looking almost skeletal, a shell of the building that had once stood in the forest. According to the locals, the carrier had been sent to deliver a notice to Mr. Corhill, explaining that his house was being foreclosed. But it seems someone, or something, had beaten them to it. A fire had spread from the house's fireplace, quickly engulfing the entire structure, presumably with Jonathan still inside. It wasn't until later that very same year that Jonathan Corhill was officially reported as a missing person case with the local authorities. Any search that was undertaken in an attempt to find him uncovered next to no evidence of his whereabouts. To this day, nobody knows for certain if Jonathan Corhill is dead or alive. His whereabouts are unknown. On the surface, it might be easy to make the assumption that the infernal occult skeleton reduced the reclusive old man to nothing more than a cinder. It definitely seems plausible that Jonathan, collecting firewood to keep himself warm in his isolation, accidentally chopped down part of an SCP-060 oak, put it in his fireplace, and called forth the vengeful flaming bones. But perhaps we shouldn't be so certain. After all, Corhill's house wasn't entirely burned down, despite the entity normally trying to cause as much damage as possible whenever it appears. And on top of that, no human remains were found in the house. And the skeleton of SCP-060 Alpha had to have come from somewhere, right? SCP-060 offers a few warnings, and not just about the dangers of traveling through the forest alone. The appearance of the flaming skeleton whenever the SCP-060 white oaks are burned could serve as a reminder that we need to be vigilant in protecting the forests of this world. Trees are one of our few sustainable resources, but for every one we cut down or that catches fire, it takes years to regrow a replacement. And perhaps the third and final warning of the infernal occult skeleton is simply, don't play with matches, especially around trees. Otherwise, you might get burned. Imagine if you could predict the future. Not perfectly, mind you, but with enough accuracy that brilliant enough minds, say the best and brightest of the SCP Foundation, could plausibly reverse engineer the main determinative factors that caused a certain timeline to form. Imagine if, through carefully studying these determinative factors, the Foundation could carefully shape the future into one that's more favorable for the human race than all the alternatives. The preferred option, if you will. Would this not be advantageous? Your next question is a very natural one given the circumstances. How does one predict the future in such a manner? Well, the answer is uncomplicated, but that doesn't by any means make it easy. You go there, spend a few months looking around, and then come back to report your findings. That's right, folks. We're not talking psychics and seers here. Prepare to expand your mind, and please don't worry if it all gets a little timey-wimey, because SCP-2003 is the SCP Foundation's self-made time machine. Even most of the staff at the SCP Foundation itself don't know much about SCP-2003 given the highly sensitive nature of the projects surrounding it. Much like SCP-2000 is a trump card securing our present in the case of a catastrophic XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, SCP-2003 is our prophylactic for such a thing happening in the foreseeable future. What's far more unique about SCP-2003 is that the SCP Foundation created this ace in the hole from scratch. The SCP-2003 time machine was invented over a 25-year period by reverse engineering the anomalous technology of 3 different classified anomalies and retrofitting them into our own non-anomalous framework. The massive machine is housed in Armed Site-47, a remote and well-guarded facility disguised as an oil refinery. While extensive records of SCP-2003's construction have been made by the Foundation, and it stands to reason that the machine could be reliably and successfully reproduced in a different context, even the most intelligent scientists taking part in the project couldn't explain how or why it actually operates. In the words of another mad inventor, it just works. The operating principle of SCP-2003 are relatively simple to understand. It is able to break the laws of the space-time continuum by immediately transporting anything or anyone placed in its central chamber to some point in the chronological future. The subjects transported forwards will remain in this future for several months, before instantaneously being transported back to the exact location they were standing in the future. In order to prevent some kind of unfortunate accident, like phasing back halfway through a wall and becoming unpleasant modern art, the Foundation has established a secure facility for travelers to head and wait out the rest of their time when their mission is complete. Through extensive testing, including that which was performed under the purview of Project XN Shepherd, the Foundation has discovered a great deal about the nature of time travel via SCP-2003. We'll outline the most crucial caveats here, so what happens next makes a lot more sense to you. After all, if time travel was easy, everyone would do it. First, as we alluded to earlier, the data collected by SCP-2003 on the nature of the future is often unclear, imprecise, and unreliable. For example, the data collected from 2003 did provide extremely useful in predicting and preventing a massive security breach over at Site-19 in 1997. So naturally, when it predicted a devastating series of earthquakes off the west coast of the United States in 1999, an event that several agents sent through SCP-2003 observed directly, it came as a shock to everyone when nothing happened. The Foundation discovered, following this, that all predictions needed to be contextualized through heaps of metadata for it to be of any real use in predicting or preventing our specific future. The Foundation also discovered that certain individuals had a strangely disproportionate effect on the unfolding of future events. Let's say, for example, SCP-2003 discovers that a new type of nuclear weapon will be invented in 2028 and quickly adopted by a number of leading nations by 2030. And by 2035, tensions will rise, sabers will rattle, and this nuclear weapon will be used en masse to destroy human society as we know it. Naturally, in order to prevent this, the Foundation might see to it that certain groups of nuclear scientists, certain generals, and certain world leaders get liquidated. And yet another trip into the future shows that this massive nuclear war was not averted. But why? Because it just so happens that this event was inexplicably tied to the birth of a little boy named James Hoskins in Saskatoon circa 2025. Despite little Jimmy Hoskins seemingly having nothing to do with the actual development of the technology, seeing as he's only 10 years old when the bombs start falling. The Foundation scientists working under Project XN Shepherd keep a database of all these highly determinative individuals, also known as magnifier individuals, so they can keep tabs on how they're affecting any future timelines. Speaking of future timelines, we're afraid to tell you that this penultimate caveat isn't exactly a pleasant one. There are few to any cohesive future timelines where humanity survives long term. Bummer, right? The Foundation calls these loose timelines determinative sets, and in the majority of them, human civilization collapses, all humans die, and in some cases, the Earth becomes completely uninhabitable to all forms of life. The Foundation is currently seeking a more optimistic option through controlled manipulations of the casual stream in our time. But currently, all we have is the preferred option, Option XN. And if you're someone who would jump at the chance to travel into the future and take a gander at all the wondrous or terrifying sights, there's actually one pretty major caveat of SCP-2003 that we've been playing rather close to the chest. Early Foundation tests found out that the time travel process via SCP-2003 is extremely damaging to plant and animal tissue. Rather than just going on a wacky time travel adventure like Doctor Who or Austin Powers, it'd be a little more like stepping into a giant microwave while dressed in a spacesuit made of aluminum foil. You're gonna die a horrible death. But there is one silver lining. Well, maybe not silver from your perspective, probably more like pewter. The Foundation has discovered a way to viably send human-adjacent subjects through time with SCP-2003 without instantaneous death. We just can't promise that you're going to like it. You see, the one kind of organic tissue that seems to survive the SCP-2003 time travel process is the human brain and nervous system. Due to the highly controlled nature of Project XN Shepherd, the Foundation can't just send in D-classes to do the job. They instead use actual agents, though mostly ones who are nearing or beyond retirement, or are suffering from a terminal illness. These agents are dosed on a course of anti-anxiety, antidepressant, and antipsychotic chemotherapy to toughen their minds for the horrors to come. Though the exact nature of these horrors is kept secret from them until it's already happened. You may be familiar with one of the Foundation's most well-known front companies, Boston Dynamics, as well as one of their most famous products, the robotic quadrupedal probe known as Big Dog. Well, in order to send a sentient being through time without them being completely destroyed by SCP-2003, the agent's brain and nervous system are entirely removed from their body and transported into the body of a modified Big Dog. Still think it'd be fun to time travel? Hey, don't look so nervous. For everyone who agrees to be part of an SCP-2003 mission and survives, you'll get one hell of a pension. Or at least your family will, if that's any consolation. Now that you understand all this, let's come clean about this mysterious Project XN Shepherd we've been alluding to throughout the video. It all started with a letter to the heads of the SCP-2003 research project from O5-7, a member of the legendary O5 Council that instructs the Foundation in all that it does. The letter read, "Up until this point, all attempts at future intervention using SCP-2003 have been limited in scope and scattershot in nature. I have seen the wisdom in this approach. It is informed by painstaking contingency planning and risk-benefit evaluation. The past 18 months of reports, however, have promise. If we are bold enough to seize the initiative, we may have found a way out here. The price, though, there's always a price, as you well know. Consider this note an official change in policy. As of today, all efforts at intervention are now aimed at bringing about and preserving XN. Designated magnifier individuals associated with XN are to be protected from undue interference at the expense of all other priorities. In particular, Nuru Diang must be allowed to die in the manner most observations have predicted for her. If anything at all changes in that regard, make it happen. I trust that you're familiar enough with the rest of the determinative sets to understand why we're going this way." So, in short of all the potential timelines, O5-7 wants the researchers assigned to SCP-2003 to ensure that the timeline XN is the one that actually comes to be, seeing as it's preferable to the alternatives, hence Project XN Shepherd. You're probably wondering, what happens in timeline XN that makes it the most desirable outcome possible? Well, things continue as normal. Everything from anomalous activity to social unrest to environmental factors stay pretty much the same as time goes on. until 2349 when a giant 22-kilometer asteroid strikes the Earth and wipes out the majority of humanity in an instant. Following this, the world becomes unfit for human habitation. Hey, don't look so glum. You'll all be dead by then. Well, except Dr. Bright. Sorry again, Jack. We at least get a nice 3 centuries before we're wiped from the cosmic table. Your next question is probably, if the preferred option has humanity being wiped out by a giant asteroid in a little over 300 years, what are all the other ones? Aren't we entitled to a multiple-choice future if we don't feel comfortable with being completely annihilated by an asteroid before we're even halfway to the year 3000? Well, we'll give you a little tasting platter of potential timelines, and you can take your pick. There was the narrowly avoided Scenario XB, where things progressed in a similar fashion to Scenario XN, except a massive gamma-ray burst from the sun in April 2017 wiped out all life on Earth within 38 seconds. Then there's Scenario XE, where the birth of an unnamed boy in Turkmenistan combined with the election of Sir William Entwistle as Prime Minister of New Zealand in 2049 leads to a world-destroying nuclear exchange between Israel and Greater Indonesia in 2058. Any attempts to stop it just make it happen sooner. Or what about Scenario XH? Here, a deadly mutated form of influenza causes the deaths of over 1 billion people worldwide. Combating this threat causes increased cooperation between world governments that actually resulted in a huge net improvement for global peace and quality of life. It seems unrealistic, we know, but SCP-2003 doesn't lie. However, despite things going well, all known life on Earth just vanishes on July 29, 2059. It's a hell of an unpleasant twist after things start going so well for once. In Scenario XO, the anomalous increases in frequency and magnitude in 2037. This leads to a broken masquerade scenario where the Foundation's web of secrecy collapses, and anomalous chaos reigns across the globe. The Foundation's members are hunted and killed, and world governments attempting to weaponize the anomalous leads to a new arms race that wipes out all of humanity by 2048. Or maybe Scenario XU is more your cup of tea. In this one, the sun collapses, leading to eternal darkness and massive temperature drops. Inexplicably, humans still survive, but are in a state of constant, unmoving agony. And maybe, if you just really love spiders, you'll get a kick out of Scenario XX, where a mysterious pathogenic protist causes the majority of humanity to fall in love with the Brazilian wandering spider, one of the few spiders that pose an actual threat to humans. The diverting of all resources meant to keep humans alive to instead breeding the spiders, combined with many people being killed by the resulting spiders, leads to 6 billion deaths in the early 2030s. But hey, you'll get to see some pretty great spiders if that's your thing, I guess. Scenario XN is hardly a picnic. Nobody likes the idea of facing an Armageddon straight out of Armageddon, when that asteroid kills all life on Earth in 300 years. But while it undeniably isn't perfect, it may just be the best option we've got. Isn't the future amazing?
Are you afraid of haunted houses? What about haunted castles, or prisons, or mental asylums? We've all seen or heard tales of terrible tortured souls walking down long and lonely hallways, looking for people to pass their ancient pain onto. But what about something a lot more subtle? Perhaps as humble and unassuming as a cozy little woodshed. An adventurer named Kate would find that sometimes terrible things hide in simple places. With every step, twigs broke under the sole of her boot, their snaps echoing around the emptiness of the surrounding forest. Birds cawed down at her from their perches up above, a grave omen, a warning not to tread further. Well, at least to anyone who actually bought into all that superstitious stuff. Kat was far from a believer in that sort of thing, although at the same time, she had more than a passing interest in all things occult and unnatural. For her, it was less about the actual practice of certain things. The appeal was more about the stories that those practices inspired. Legends and myths, spooky tales of ghosts, or the dead rising from their graves, and of course, the magical mother of them all, witchcraft. Although her fascination with the inexplicable and macabre rarely, if ever, overlapped with her other big passion, hiking. Until, of course, today. She could trek anywhere and wanted to aim for everywhere, through sprawling national parks filled with vibrant greenery, up the sides of mountains, climbing up to the peaks, to across deserts following the almost empty highways to get from one tiny rural town to the next. There was something about getting to not just know about the world, but to actively go and see it with her own two eyes, to actually be out there in it. That felt so right. On her current journey, Kate had taken herself on a long trail through the heart of the American Midwest, lugging a heavy pack over her shoulders, filled with her tent, sleeping bag, outdoor cooking supplies, and all manner of camping gear. She had set off following the winding path of the Patoka River, which ran around or adjacent to a few of the major cities in the state of Indiana. Kate was hoping to follow the flow of its main body of water all the way through to the city of Jasper. From there, it would be a straight shot over to the similarly named Patoka Lake, and after she had walked around the entire circumference of that, it would be a long hike east towards West Virginia, home of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sure, it was one hell of an ambitious trip for one person traveling alone, but Kate liked to keep her journeys unencumbered. Having someone else coming with her would just slow her down, or they wouldn't be able to keep up with her at all. There's no fun at all in that. Stopping for the night, Kate lit herself a campfire. She had to make sure to keep it far enough from the trees to avoid starting any potential catastrophes, but also not too close to the wet bank of the Patoka, otherwise her kindling wouldn't catch alight. There were so many variables to consider for any aspiring camper. Sparks from the flint that she always took on her travels struck the dry twigs she had collected, and soon a gentle orange glow and wave of low heat were radiating from it. The fire provided Kate with just enough light to unfold and peg down her tent as the diminishing visibility of the dusk gave way to the encroaching nighttime darkness. Before getting comfortable in her sleeping bag, she put out her campfire using water from the Patoka, then zipped up the front of her tent, keeping a flimsy cloth barrier between herself and the local wildlife. Not everyone found it easy to sleep in the woods as Kate did. She couldn't remember a time when the noise of breaking twigs or the sounds of movement outside had ever kept her awake. Even now, the rustle of leaves and branches did little to disturb her, regardless of whether it was just the wind or something else moving through the bushes. Woken up by the sun rising, its warm light breaking through the trees, Kate readied herself to leave. She never stopped at the same place for more than one night, and rarely slept for any longer than she needed to. A nice 8-hour recharge of her energy reserves, and then it was back to the open road. After a quick breakfast, she packed up her single-person campsite, folded up her tent, and stuffed it back into her bag. Kate had been just about to leave when she noticed something was missing. Her compass. It had been in her backpack, which she kept in the tent with her all night. Quickly scanning the ground around her, she couldn't see it. Weird, but she figured she had obviously dropped it at some point during her hike and would have to pick up a new one when she got to Jasper. It didn't matter. She could just follow the Patoka River as planned, although it didn't quite sit easy with her the rest of the day's trek. She'd packed the compass. That she was absolutely certain of. After all, she knew it wasn't like her to leave it behind. But then again, could she have forgotten it entirely? Over the next few hours, the question went round and round in Kate's head. As she walked along the bank of the river, silently starting to doubt herself, she drifted a little deeper into the woods, until out of the corner of her eye, she spotted something standing among the trees. It wasn't an animal, or even a figure, but a structure. Spending so much time out in nature, anything man-made usually stuck out as an obvious, unignorable eyesore to Kate. She looked at it from a distance. It looked like an old house, isolated out in the woods, a short walk from the Patoka River. Checking the sky over her shoulder, Kate noticed it was getting late again, the daylight having gradually lowered while she had been wondering about why she had left her compass behind, or if it had been taken. Deciding to set up camp closer to the little house, she turned and headed in to inspect it closer. The place was far from the lap of modern luxury. Not that Kate couldn't live without running water or electricity for long stints of time, but it wasn't a house that had been built recently. Although she was no expert in either archaeology or architecture, Kate didn't think anyone had lived there for decades, possibly even centuries. It was almost medieval, a single room that was completely ramshackle, practically falling apart at the seams. Everywhere she looked, the wood that had originally been used to build it was either rotting away or had been broken into splintered remains. Plants from the forest had started growing through the floors and the walls, as if nature was trying to reclaim this spot of land where someone had once come to get away from the rest of the world. Sighing, Kat shook her head as she looked at the dilapidated house. There was no way even she could sleep there. It was too much of a safety risk. Parts of the ceiling could easily fall on her during the night if the wind picked up enough. Turning to leave, she stopped in her tracks as she noticed another structure, much smaller, behind the house. It had been so dwarfed in size by the slightly bigger building that it was completely obscured from view, but it looked to be in much better shape in terms of its structural integrity. It was a woodshed, its front door hanging lazily open. While not exactly brand new by anyone's standards, it was at least far more intact than the main house. Taking a few steps forward, Kate felt something like glass crunch under the heel of her boot. She scanned the floor, instinctively checking for any more so as to not injure herself. Even with the low amount of sunlight fading ever rapidly, it didn't look like more. Kicking her boot to loosen the shard, she made her way towards the woodshed, not noticing that what she'd been standing on had been a compass. Reaching the shed, she peered inside. It was pitch black within, almost as dark as the rest of the forest would be in a few minutes. Taking off her backpack and setting it down, she searched inside for her flashlight. Retrieving it and flipping on the switch, she looked back into the shed, and that was when she saw it. Taking a step back, Kat tripped over her bag, scrambling back up to her feet to make sure she had seen what she thought she had. It was just lying there, still and lifeless. For a split second, she hoped it was a trick of the light, just an old decaying lump of wood, but it wasn't. It was a body. The remains were charred, reduced to little more than bones some time ago. Even the ground next to it looked like it had been scorched, blackened by some intense fire damage. Kate's eyes were so transfixed on the burned mass of bones that a sudden sound startled her. Thunder growled above, immediately telling her she had little choice in what to do next. Her options were either she could sleep outdoors and get drenched by the rain and possibly catch hypothermia from being cold and wet, or she could spend a night in the cramped confines of this woodshed, which she would have to share with a long-dead body. Walking back outside to retrieve her bag, she pulled out a ground sheet and used it to cover up the bones. It was a mostly sleepless night, and those were a rarity for Kate. Any sleep she did get was light, easily interrupted by as little as her own movements, and offered her no actual rest. But for the next few hours, she just lay awake on the wooden floor. It wasn't the sounds of rain drumming against the shed's ceiling or the booming of thunderclaps that were keeping her awake. Thoughts of what she was going to do about the bones kept coming to the forefront of Kate's mind. Should she report it to the police when she got to Jasper? Was there even any point if she had no idea where on the map this abandoned place was? Frustrated, she tossed and turned, eventually sitting up as something made a sound. It was a low, creaking, rusty metal hinge, screeching for a lack of any oiling over the years. The door was open, swinging lazily in the decreasing winds, its lock having long since broken. Grumbling to herself, Kate reached for an old shovel that had been left in the shed and went to grab the open door. As her head poked out from the shed, she looked around. It was the middle of the night, nothing to be seen anywhere around. Yet, she couldn't escape the feeling she was being watched. Taking the shovel, she jammed it underneath the doorframe, keeping it closed. At last, there was quiet. Maybe now she'd be able to get some much-needed sleep, and she did. But that's when the nightmare started. The dream was bizarre, unlike anything Kate had ever experienced before. She instantly recognized the warm, flickering orange glow of a large fire before her. Naturally, she started to pace her way towards it, the fire's heat washing over her the closer she got. But as she approached, Kate noticed something moving amongst the flames. Arms flailed, trying desperately to extinguish the blaze, legs kicking and writhing, and that was on top of the screaming. Another figure was standing facing the bonfire, their back to Kate as she walked closer still. With every step, the sounds of insects buzzing could be heard getting louder and louder. But it wasn't until she stepped near enough that she saw where the noise was coming from. A swarm of bugs was darting through the air, hovering around the other figure. There were enough of the insects that they formed what looked like a cloak, every part of it moving and buzzing of its own accord. The whole nightmare was so vivid, Kate had no idea if it had been brought on by her exhaustion or that her mind was still fixated on the bones she'd found in the woodshed. Dehydration, lack of food, or even some other influence. It could have been any one of those factors that had caused her to dream a dream like this, or a combination of all of them. Nonetheless, she could feel the bugs tapping at her skin as she walked up to the other figure, still unable to see them clearly. The noise of insect wings whizzed past her ears louder than ever, loud enough to be real. Putting a hand on the figure's shoulder, Kate turned them around. It was a woman, or what was left of her. She had huge gaping wounds left by something that had been cruelly buried in her face. Yet somehow, she was still standing, dead but also alive at the same time. The swarm of bugs around her moved with her body as she turned and faced Kate, a pair of glassy eyes staring at her. They were both blank, completely empty, each one missing its pupil. Opening her mouth, the woman let out a piercing, blood-curdling shriek. All around her, the sound of the bugs got louder, almost deafening, and as she screamed, so did Kate. Panting and shuddering, she bolted upright, shock racking her entire body, heart thudding against her ribcage. Instantly, the exact moment she woke up, Kate realized that feeling was back. She had spent so much of her time hiking through the woods on her own that she could tell when someone was watching her. In the dark, she fumbled for her flashlight and clicked it on to reveal the door was still jammed shut. Apart from her, there was no one else inside the shed, no one alive at least. Looking over her shoulder, she could see the bones behind her and immediately backed away from them, as far as she could in that tiny wooden hut. She had covered them before going to bed, she was certain of it, hadn't she? All of a sudden, Kate felt her skin start to itch, an intense, irritating feeling. She had experienced the effects of poison ivy and all sorts of plants that caused similar reactions, but this was easily 1,000 times worse. Her skin felt like it was burning. She scraped her fingernails down her exposed arm, trying to suppress the itching even for a moment, but it did nothing. She scratched at the other arm over and over again in one spot until her flesh was pink and raw. Still no change. Kate raked her nails over her own body, this time leaving a deep scratch trailing over her arm. Under the light of her torch, she'd realized that she'd drawn blood. She looked back at the bones in the scorched corner of the shed. The skull was facing straight towards her, hollowed-out eye sockets staring as empty as the pupilless eyes of the woman in her nightmare. It had done this. It must have done, she thought. Reaching towards the door, dropping her flashlight, she wrenched the shovel out from where she used it to wedge the entrance closed. She stood up, kicking her sleeping bag and backpack to the side. As hard as she could, desperate to make the itching stop, Kate brought the shovel downwards. The head of it snapped the already weakened floorboards of the shed, exposing the soft, dry earth beneath. Maybe if she buried those charred remains, whatever was happening to her would stop. Frantically, she started digging, hurling shovelfuls of dirt through the shed door. It listed further open, creaking loudly on its rusted hinges again, causing Kate to turn, startled at the sound of it knocking against the outer wall of the shed. Someone was looking right at her. She could feel it as real and as persistent as the itching feeling that crawled over her skin like the tiny legs of an army of insects. She dug further, eventually throwing the shovel to one side and dragging her hands through the exposed earth below, desperately burrowing through and only stopping to use any rock she found to try and stop the itch. All she achieved was drawing more blood. Her fingers touched something soft but solid, and Kate brushed away to clear more of the excess dirt, trying to uncover whatever it was. It felt like a long mass just beneath the ground, with a second similar object parallel to it. But the further along with it she reached, the quicker she realized what it was. A leg. Clearing more of the dirt higher up, Kate could feel more. A stomach, ribs, shoulders, and a head. Reaching for her flashlight buried under some of the dirt that had been dug up, she pointed it at the thing she'd found. The woman, the same one from her nightmare. Something inside her chest moved, scratching sharply, causing Kate to cough. And once she started, she couldn't stop. It was like the itching she'd felt on the outside had now worked its way inside, and it was spreading. No, moving. In fact, not just moving, but crawling. Through her lungs, burrowing down into her stomach, and at the same time, upwards. The clawing of tiny legs digging their way up her windpipe, blocking it. Kate couldn't breathe. She dropped to her knees, retching as she struggled for air, sputtering as she felt something move at the back of her throat. That was when she heard the buzzing again. Locusts. A swarm of them came spilling out of Kate's mouth. She couldn't scream, let alone catch her breath. They filled the shed in seconds, engulfing her entire body, as more and more of the desert bugs still came pouring from her mouth. Outside, the wind kicked up again, with enough force to blow the door to the woodshed closed, trapping Kate inside with the bugs that tore at her. There was a single word on the wooden surface of the door, written in deep black charcoal. She'd missed it. The door had been open when she found the shed. The word was witch.
The SCP Foundation would later find this cursed cabin and would naturally lose a number of D-classes to a horrific form of locust-based suffocation. While there are clues as to what exactly is going on in this terrible place, from the malice of a long-dead sorceress to the lingering revenge of a woman wrongfully persecuted, definite answers as to the anomalous mechanisms of the shed known as SCP-4595 still elude even the Foundation's finest minds. It's a place so mysterious and dangerous that the special containment procedures read, "For safety purposes, no personnel are permitted to enter SCP-4595. SCP-4595 should only be entered by authorized testing personnel under the supervision of the SCP-4595 Research Lead. Under no circumstances is SCP-4595-A to be disturbed in any way." So perhaps we'll never truly know why a humble wooden shed in Jasper, Indiana causes such horrifying effects for its victims. The SCP Foundation thinks it's safer to just lock it away and forget about it, letting its ancient wood and old bones rot in the dark. But if you are really curious about the truth, you can always take a walk down the side of the Patoka River and pay the witch a visit. If you're lucky, you might even get to leave.
Step right up, folks! We've got all kinds of refreshing and tasty treats here for you today! Popcorn, peanuts, cotton candy, and even fried dough! Yes, sirree, here at SCP Explained, we're offering the top-of-the-line anomalous delectable foodstuffs for all your circus-themed fun-time occasions. And that's because today, yes, today, on this YouTube platform, our infamous acronym doesn't stand for Secure, Contain, Protect. It stands for Sweet Confectionery Products. And let me tell you, dear viewer, the SCP we're looking at today just might be the most decadent, durable, and dangerous dessert that's ever desired to be devoured. We're talking about SCP-3077, or as they are better known, the Sugar Golems. These little fellas are safe class and also totally harmless, so long as you take the proper precautions. What's the matter, don't you believe me? Don't you think it's nice of us to cover a safe SCP now and again? And hey now, why all this dull talk about rules and regulations in the first place? You don't go out to the carnival to not take wild and exciting risks. Every spinny, twirly, and whirly ride on the fairgrounds comes with a statistically higher chance of a tragic mishap befalling you and any other thrill seekers around you. But we all take that chance anyway for the extraordinary rush of the experience. And such is the wacky and wonderful ways of our adorable and questionably edible chums, the Sugar Golems. Don't you just love them, folks? Ain't they a sight for sore eyes and a pang for sweet teeth? Well, we're only just getting started. The best is yet to come, ladies and non-ladies. So pull up a chair and be sure to watch what we've got in store. You can make like a piece of old candy and stick around. Now that's a knee slapper, ain't it? Sit back, relax, and make sure to enjoy the show. You should also subscribe to SCP Explained if you'd like to continue to be entertained. Hey, that rhymed! What do you know? I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. Ha! How droll. While SCP-3077 refers to the anomalous substance contained in Site-81, the semi-humanoid instances, which are nicknamed Sugar Golems, are themselves an animate and independent byproduct that naturally spawns from SCP-3077 when it is allowed to exist outside of containment procedures. The most important of these containment procedures being that SCP-3077 must remain at a constant temperature of well below its freezing point, and only be stored in containers full to capacity, lest its aforementioned byproducts attempt to breach containment. The total volume of SCP-3077 within the cryogenic containment unit equals almost 2,200 liters, and it is believed to be the only known quantity of the anomalous substance in existence. For the sake of clarity in distinguishing between SCP-3077 and its byproducts, we'll be referring to the main object contained by the Foundation as SCP-3077, while the gooey little guys who we know to spontaneously split off from the source of SCP-3077 will be regarded as SCP-3077-1. As mentioned before, SCP-3077-1 instances have been affectionately dubbed the Sugar Golems. Every instance of SCP-3077-1 resembles an approximately 1 meter tall, gaunt humanoid, composed of a pure sugar-derived substance commonly known as treacle. And that's molasses for all y'all yeehaw cowboys over there in the US of A. If you've ever played the classic board game Candyland, you'll have some idea of what an individual instance of SCP-3077 looks like from the beloved and often remembered character of Gloppy. who lives in the molasses swamp section of the board, and is also fittingly made out of molasses himself. Yes, indeed, Gloppy is truly a delight for a weary Candyland player to meet. What did you say? Are you folks too young to know about Candyland? Well, that factoid certainly makes this narrator feel pretty old. Then again, I am taking on the mannerisms and attire of an old-fashioned carnival barker, so I suppose a bit of novel antiquity comes with the territory. Regardless, the Golems are each composed of roughly 7 liters of sweet, syrupy goodness. And very much like everyone's favorite character, Gloppy, they all lack defined lower bodies and can all emote through crude yet oddly endearing vocalizations in the place of intelligible speech. While their facial features are simplistic and misshapen, the contours of concave eyes and gaping mouth are usually present. The exact number of these eyes and mouths is subject to variation, much like the color of the board spaces in a wonderful, wholesome family game of Candyland. While each SCP-3077-1 instance is around the same size, the body proportions and overall shape of each instance are rather fluid, pun fully intended. Some possess oversized arms or bulbous heads, while others might be conjoined to an adjacent sugar golem, as if to show that the two are inseparable as a pair of best buddies. Or, as some others might put it, a couple of BFFFs, best friends for fancy frolicking. They really are quite friendly looking, aren't they? And aren't they? They sure are. For the only thing that these sugary sweet SCP instances want is to be in the company of human beings just like you. Yes, you! Who else would I be talking to? It's a hard life for this worn-down Connie, let me tell you. These little sugar golems love what they do and do what they love. But that doesn't mean that it's time for fun and games. Even though SCP-3077-1 instances want to hang around human beings, they don't tend to stop at hey and hello or whatever those appropriate greetings sound like when they are being gurgled by a diminutive molten sugar monster. Things can get out of hand real fast, just like an orange cream popsicle melting in the sun of a late summer's day. Now listen up, it's important that you pay attention to what I say next. I'm about to book learn you about what to do if an instance of SCP-3077-1 enters your personal space. The results of prolonged contact with this SCP can end badly if you're not careful. I'm not going to sugarcoat any of the chewy details of your grisly fate, and I promise that it won't be a cakewalk. So don't be a nerd and listen up. Yes, that's right, I called you a nerd. You know, like Nerds, the candy. How do you folks seriously not know Nerds? They were a classic Halloween candy from the Wonka Company, and they were very popular back in the day. Oh, what's that you say? How long ago was it back in the day for me? That's a bit of a rude question, wouldn't you say? Oh, I oughta. Won't you go ahead and knock it off with the wise guy questions? What are you, a pack of smarties? Ha ha! I said smarties, get it? It's just like the. Never mind. Let's just move on to the explanation of how to survive a close encounter with this SCP. That was the main reason you came all this way to this here educational and entertaining video presentation after all. To pick up where I left off, instances of SCP-3077-1 have a tendency to seek out nearby human life. The reason for doing so is surprisingly simple and alarmingly, well, alarming. These sticky saccharine simulacra are solely set on slithering into people's mouths for the purposes of gaining total control of their bodies. Yes, you heard that right. Believe it or not, the same anomalous property which animates the sugar golem's treacle bodies is apparently capable of overriding the human nervous system from the inside. And that's no joke, folks. While these tasty treats might sound sweet to eat, you'll be a puppet of meat from your head to your feet if you don't complete the tasks I entreat. If an instance of SCP-3077-1 attempts to enter your mouth, you must remember first and foremost to keep your trap shut, blocking it with a mask or similar article of clothing if need be. Next, you must use your limbs and all available implements to batter the attacking golem away, while you do your best to keep a distance of at least arm's reach between yourself and the instance. It should come as a relief to our rational people that SCP-3077-1 instances are severely limited in their physical capabilities, and an adult human of average fitness can easily hold one off if they know what to expect. The tricky part comes from the amorphous properties of the instance's viscous treacle bodies, as well as their anomalous ability to regenerate from any physical trauma. The only way to permanently destroy an instance of SCP-3077-1 is to expose it to temperatures above its melting point, which for you sticklers out there is approximately 176 degrees Celsius. The most effective weapons against SCP-3077-1 instances include firebombs, flamethrowers, and your run-of-the-mill convection ovens. If it is at all possible to contain the instance within a sealed vessel, such as a large Tupperware or wooden barrel, then you ought to do whatever you can to prevent the candy creeps from running amok. While ordinary below-zero temperatures are unable to destroy the anomalous treacle of SCP-3077, instances of SCP-3077-1 can effectively be slowed down or stopped completely if you put them on ice. Whether it's the hot foot or the cold shoulder, some form of extreme temperature should always be weaponized when defending oneself from an SCP-3077-1 instance. Any attempt to crush or smash an SCP-3077-1 instance will only result in the bad bonbon breaking apart and reforming into several more belligerent bite-sized blighters. A human under siege by the sugar golems might find themselves quickly outnumbered if they foolishly attempt to use a melee weapon against the anomalies. Basically, it's like a more delicious version of the popular arcade video game Asteroids. No? I guess that reference was from before even my time. At any rate, instances of SCP-3077-1 are difficult to destroy without access to heat or freezing. The tendency of the molasses menaces to increase in number is made even worse because of the fact that any amount of SCP-3077 outside of containment can generate a nearly infinite number of SCP-3077-1. While even an army of SCP-3077-1 instances is far weaker than an equivalent pack of hunting animals, the ability to continuously multiply and physiology that doesn't experience the consequences of fatigue means that, given enough time, the sugar golems can outlast any amount of human resistance until they roll over their preferred prey like a slow, insurmountable, syrupy tsunami of surrender! Seriously scary stuff, some would say. But what happens next is the real kicker, folks. Mind this ballyhoo's somber spiel. If an instance of SCP-3077-1 manages to, against all odds, clamber its way into a human chatterbox and hijack the poor sap's nervous system, the victim is immediately classified as SCP-3077-2. SCP-3077-2 instances are easily distinguished from unaffected humans on sight alone. Dark tendrils of SCP-3077 can be seen visibly moving beneath the skin, and often emerge from the mouth to crisscross the instance's face, like makeup, the world's most disturbing circus clown. That's not all! After the tragic treacly transformation takes place, the movements exhibited by the instance of SCP-3077-2 will become crooked and jerky like a marionette puppeteered by a frustrated chimpanzee. During this time, the instance remains fully conscious, retaining whatever cognitive faculties it has possessed previous to its classification, but it is unable to attempt speech or exert autonomy over its own actions. This fun fact was discovered by studying the EEG recordings of several SCP-3077-2 instances, and is brought to you by the United Guild of the Existentially Terrified. If an instance of SCP-3077-2 happens to wander its way into the vicinity of any humans that haven't succumbed to the process of consuming SCP-3077-1, it will proceed to put on a jaunty performance for its newfound audience. This peculiar display involves clumsy efforts at dance choreography and the throaty singing of unsettling atonal melodies that would make your annoying cousin's road trip songs sound like they're in tune. These awkward performances continue until the audience departs from the view of SCP-3077-2 instance, or the instance expires. This confirms that the point of the gesture is to entertain. As without an audience, the SCP-3077-2 instance is not compelled to make any noises of its own accord, and in general doesn't do anything other than move around aimlessly. In the event that any number of SCP-3077-1 instances escapes from containment and causes the creation of SCP-3077-2, members of the Mobile Task Force are instructed to never stray from the line of sight of a currently performing SCP-3077-2 instance, and to approach it steadily, before restraining the instance while causing minimal harm to the body. SCP-3077-2 instances can be useful for running further tests on the anomalous properties of SCP-3077, and there are simple procedures that allow an instance to be kept alive indefinitely in containment. Any damage sustained during capture can severely hamper the efficiency of these life-sustaining procedures. The worst-case scenario is that an SCP-3077-2 instance expires before being securely contained, as this will cause the SCP-3077-1 instance to emerge from its host and resume its relentless attack on all nearby humans. It is far easier to simply deal with SCP-3077-2 instances accordingly. And this is because SCP-3077-2 only ever attempts to continue the performance and possesses neither the intention nor the capacity for retaliation. If it is deemed necessary for the effectiveness of a recapture effort, it can be permissible for the Mobile Task Force to allow instances of SCP-3077-1 outside of containing to find purchase within SCP-3077-2 to increase the ease of containment and lessen the risk of Foundation personnel being affected. The performances of SCP-3077-2 instances are rarely physically intensive enough to make capture too difficult, but it can be said that the whimsical antics of these affected humans are anything but predictable. During some rare and special performances, and if the SCP-3077-1 instance in control of SCP-3077-2 instance is feeling especially daring, it may try to show off an array of woefully inadequate acrobatic skills. Front flips that are more like belly flops, back flips that could be mistaken for pratfalls, and the sort of tightrope and trapeze acts that are better left to the imagination. In lieu of prior incidents, the Foundation strongly advises that if for any reason an instance of SCP-3077-2 must exist in containment, it must always be prevented from being at an altitude of more than 6 feet from the surface of the floor, especially if any humans it would perceive as an audience are located directly beneath where its performance would take place. Regarding the creation of further instances of SCP-3077-2, requests from any level of Foundation personnel at Site-81 or elsewhere must be granted permission to proceed by SCP-3077's head researcher because of the horrific implications of what happens to the still-aware human mind while the body is affected by SCP-3077-1. This process is only to be approved for use on D-Class personnel. That's right! And even then, in the event that all the rigmarole of the paperwork goes through, it is not acceptable to create an instance of SCP-3077-2 merely for the purpose of providing live entertainment to fellow researchers. After all, not a single one of us should be quick to forget the grotesque and highly regrettable spectacle that was Dr. Dietz's deplorable D-Class dancers. Every researcher involved with that ethical nightmare was reprimanded severely, and the colorful novelty costumes and jangling bells that all former D-Class personnel were made to wear after being reclassified to SCP-3077-2 have been permanently confiscated. Let the cotton candy machine and peanut dispenser located just outside the containment unit of SCP-3077 serve as a stern reminder that there's a time and place for monkey shines and tomfoolery, and sometimes, yes, even now and then, a highly secure Foundation facility is neither the right place nor the right time. In case you haven't picked up on it, there are very few practical applications of SCP-3077 due to the fact that its status as a food dish is negated by the consequences of consumption. The main reason for tests to be administered on SCP-3077-2 instances is to discover if there is a safe method of extracting an SCP-3077-1 instance from the body of its host without causing the expiration of the original human. Unfortunately, due to a persistent lack of success, the experiments have been discontinued indefinitely. But that just won't do. How else are we supposed to know if these things actually taste as good as they look? I won't rest until everyone is able to harmlessly ingest a sugar golem of their very own. I might be old-fashioned, but to me, the safe object class isn't just a designation, it's an invitation. I ought to be completely okay doing whatever I like around a safe object because it's safe. That word should actually mean something. Ding, dang, darn it. And I don't mean that in the sense that the SCP Foundation uses it, meaning an anomaly that doesn't present an active threat to containment efforts. And more importantly, there aren't that many anomalies that are also delicious candy. And I want to eat this one. Sorry, I lost my cool a bit there. I just have a sweet tooth, and my brain is constantly drifting back to my nostalgic childhood memories of playing Candyland with my family. That was before they all decided that they wanted nothing to do with me because I became so obsessed with dressing up like a carnival barker that I drove away everyone who's ever cared about me. Other than that, my job here at the Foundation explaining confectionery SCPs is the only thing I have left in my sad, sad life. Some days I feel less like Gloppy and more like a real Lord Licorice. In hard times like these, a fellow could really use some entertainment to cheer himself up. Wait just a flea-jumping moment!
What was that? What's the big idea? How did these escaped instances of SCP-3077-2 get in here? They're all supposed to be in safe containment a few floors down. Did somebody else from the research team let them in here because they knew I was in costume standing in front of a pretend fairground set? That's in pretty poor taste, don't you think? Pun very much intended. I should probably report it to the head researcher. That would be the ethical, reasonable thing to do. Then again, look at them go. Those are sure some hilarious dances. I'm definitely seeing a snappy attempt at doing the Charleston. A classic. And is that one doing the worm, or is it just kind of flopping on the floor? I think one of these instances knows about that Fortnite stuff all the kids are into these days, but I'm not sure if the human element or the golem that decides what dances it knows. Either way, this was exactly what I needed to feel so much better. For once, it feels like I'm actually at a carnival instead of just pretending to be at one now. This is the greatest performance I've ever seen in all my years, which you can be sure that there have been a lot of. Now, go check out SCP-261 Pan-Dimensional Vending Machine and SCP-5962 One Night at McDonald's for more anomalies that will really whet your appetite.